So you can see yourself here.
And make sure you don't put anything in front of this.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good show.
Thank you.
So if you need to move it from up here,
Okay.
okay? Because this is just lightly strapped in. So if you move it from there, you got it. Same thing for you, Annabelle. If you're moving it from up here, okay?
Okay. Like a rock star. Mhm. Okay. So what did you talk about yesterday?
Oh, I just answered questions that people have been asking me for a while and talked about this email that my friend had sent me that really had me thinking, a perspective shifting, figuring if it's making me think somebody else could benefit from whatever's going through my head. And then I talked about the WannaCry ransomware attack and how people can protect themselves. And then Mr. B asked a question about microphones at Riverside Theater. So I talked about that and how sometimes you don't see things, but they're right there. And
Good.
so I went into those kind of different directions. Just talked. It felt weird. I've done it before, but
I'm sure you have.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sort of like confession on air, right?
Yeah.
This is confession on air today.
Yeah. When I couldn't find a guest, I just felt like there was a higher purpose that the show was supposed to have yesterday instead of just
Sure.
a guest. So I felt just sort of connect in and see what I'm meant to say and just go from there.
Yeah, I believe in serendipity.
Yeah.
You know.
I've got an incredible
Divine
guest.
serendipity.
I've got an incredible guest coming up in June 6th. Brandon Webb. Have you heard of him?
Who's he? Yeah, I know the name. I can't remember. What?
One of the top snipers
Oh, yes,
ever
yes,
in
yes.
the world. The Red Circle has a new book
Yes,
out called
yeah.
The Killing School. He revamped the Navy SEAL sniper program.
Wow.
And he now runs a $100 million company.
Oh,
And he's going to be on the show. We're going to talk about mindset and focus and stuff.
wow.
Yeah.
What an opportunity.
The great thing when you're in the military, they teach you when you're like a snake, you go. And every sniper says, what I shoot is when someone moves in an angle. If you go straight, he doesn't shoot you. The military teaches you how to be shot.
Yeah.
Bring that up.
Yeah, and
I thought through that. They're teaching me how to be shot. I'm just thinking.
Well, and he talks about it in the book, just that exact
I know.
thing.
Is
It's
that
really
the same as escaping from an alligator?
Yeah.
It's better to go straight.
Yeah.
You don't get shot.
Yeah, and it's harder, but he said that it's harder if you're up against another sniper to go straight. You want to
Are we ready,
zigzag as
Mr.
much
B?
as possible because it makes it harder for them
No, we're
to
still
line
in
the shot.
news.
Okay.
They give it back to me at 8:05:08, and then we go into spots. I'll let you know when you're in your
Okay.
last spot.
Thank you. We have I have 8:05, but that's okay.
Yeah, I have 8:04.
There's nothing coming out of the headphones because the news does not come through there. Once you start hearing things in the headphones, we're in a local break.
Cool. Yeah, you'll hear the ads.
You'll tell us.
Yeah.
He'll cue you. He's
The
really good.
key would just be loose. Have fun.
Yeah.
If we have fun, the listeners will have fun. You know, that's what we want to do.
And we were founded 14 years ago. 14 years ago,
They were founded 14
Oh,
years
14.
ago.
Okay, 14 years ago. Thank you.
right here
That's
in
what I didn't know.
Indian River County.
Yeah.
Found out right away because we sent them to Indian River Walking Clinic at Miracle Mile. And it
So now we're in the local spots because you can hear Rhett doing an advertisement.
Indian River Walking Clinic. The right care, right now, Miracle Mile.
Still feels weird to use this hand.
I save $22. How?
My husband, after he had a stroke, he fell and he broke his ankle and he had to be on one of those knee scooters.
Yeah.
And it tipped over on him all the time.
Yeah. They're dangerous. They're so dangerous. And I found that the local companies that rent them have the lowest level of them versus there's
In
other
terms of stability.
in
and-
terms of stability, yeah, because they have other ones that have like all-terrain wheels, so that if you do hit a crack or a
It
little
doesn't go over.
divot, it can make it over.
It's like
it.
litigation getting up for the jury, right? Same thing.
No.
No.
They make you sign this
Every time you're
multi-page
in front of a
document
jury,
when you take one out. Did you notice
chatted
that
with
when you rented the
them.
one for your husband?
Well,
like,
to tell you the truth,
you know their kids'
someone
name.
picked it up for me, so they
I was with
probably
Helen
signed
Hayes,
the multi-page
and,
document.
Yeah.
She said,
Which
and I was
says, don't
supposed
go
to be
over
a
the
PR
speed,
person, and
don't
she
do
said,
this, don't do that, don't
you
do
just
that, don't
keep
do that. It's
everyone
like,
But it
away
wasn't
from me
electric,
for about
so how
half
could
an
you go
hour
over the
before
speed?
because I get nervous and I have to get ready.
you're supposed
I
to
said,
know
Helen Hayes
what
gets nervous?
too fast is.
Oh, excuse me.
And it's like, don't go down an incline more than this, don't do that. It's like, how can you get around?
Purchase two. Silvercrest got the GLE SUV. Barbara got informative and great to deal with at Mercedes-Benz of Fort Pierce.
Okay, this is the last spot. The Open is next. Stand by in the studio.
Probably has saved my life already.
We can all wave and say hi to everybody on YouTube and Facebook.
Can we talk about Sarah moving into her house?
We can, but don't use her last name.
Customer service is phenomenal. As I said, Mark Humphreys is wonderful. He's pleasant. He's informative. He's great to deal
She's
with.
not one of the ones I interviewed, is she? That name doesn't sound familiar.
She's the one who works at Piper.
Okay.
Of Fort Pierce, Florida.
We have a lot
You're
that
gonna
work at
love your
Piper.
experience,
We do.
I promise you.
She was homeless when she came to us, and she was
We're coming in.
And now, the most trusted name in radio, Rhett Palmer, the mayor of the airwaves.
Good morning, Vero Beach. This is Stanford Erickson. I'm sitting in for Rhett Palmer, who's on assignment. And I wrote a book about a year and a half ago called The Kind of Women Who Could Be President of the United States. And today we have 4 women that could be the kind of woman that could be President of the United States. I have Laura Stewart here, who is my co-host, and she has her own radio program, and she always helps me out once in a while. And I have Miss Lowry, right? Miss Ostler. Miss Ostler is the producer of the show. I have Barbara Lowry. She is the chair of United Against Poverty. And I have Annabelle Robertson, and she's the executive director. And we're really, you know, people suffer so much. That we read about homeless. We read about those who are up against it. And Barbara, how did you get into this program called United Against Poverty here in Vero Beach?
Well, I have been extremely fortunate to have been able to participate on both sides of the social service world. I participated with organizations that were funders to nonprofit agencies, and I have worked with nonprofit agencies. And when the time came for me to make a choice, it was an easy choice. Because although there is a tremendous need for all the services that are provided by the social service agencies in Indian River County, most of them treat the symptoms of poverty. What differentiates United Against Poverty, which we affectionately refer to as UP, is that we deal with the causes of poverty. If you provide someone with food, you fed them. As they say, you give a person a fish, they eat for a day. And if you give someone a person to sleep, then the next day they still don't have any place to sleep. So how do you deal with this problem?
Could we just hold them in? I think Mr. B wants to fix your mic so that it's a little better for you. There.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. B. Mr. B runs everything here, so I don't do anything unless he approves it. Please go on.
Well, United Against Poverty's approach is let's identify the cause of the problem, and let's try to fix the problem. Because frankly, the only way you can raise people out of poverty is by providing them with financial resources of their own.
You know, I had a wife and I love my sons. And when they went to college and they came back from college, I wanted them there because it's fun to be around my sons. And she said, we're going to charge them rent, and they're going to get a job, and I want to kick them out of the house. And I said, you love them so much? She said, that's why we're doing this. Is that what you're talking about?
What we're talking about is providing an opportunity for individuals to have the dignity of being self-reliant. Many of the people that we deal with have tremendous obstacles to financial independence. Some have never lived in a home where their parents have been role models for going to work. Some of the people that we see on a daily basis have physical impairments or mental impairments or substance abuse issues. But there are a large number of people that come into our organization that are in a position, if given the opportunity, to pick themselves up and find a way to secure employment and, more importantly, to maintain employment.
Annabelle Robertson, tell us a little bit when this program started and how it operates. And how long have you been with it?
United Against Poverty was founded here in Indian River County by Austin and Jenny Hunt 14 years ago. When we were first founded, we were called Harvest Food and Outreach Center, which many of your listeners may have heard of. And our new name is United Against Poverty.
Why'd you change the name?
We changed the name because it more clearly reflects the work we're doing. People thought of Harvest as a food bank, and we are not a food bank. We're an anti-poverty organization that addresses poverty in 4 main ways. We have 4 main programs, which are food assistance through our member share grocery program, which is what the organization was initially founded with, that program. And then we have our workforce development program, which is our job training program that we partner here in the community with motivated individuals who are seeking to get employed, as Barbara was talking about.
How do you determine if they're motivated? Isn't that difficult?
Well, we get referrals into our into that program in 3 ways, and one of them is self-identification. So it's clearly somebody's motivated if they come to your door asking for help.
Sure.
The second is through programs like Samaritan Center and other housing, Camp Haven, Hope for Families, the New Naomi Center will be referring people to us. And those programs are residential, but we also get referrals from other non-residential programs. And that is simply they identify somebody who needs a job or needs assistance or has a crisis, and they refer them into our programs, and we try to assist them, which when somebody's in crisis often is they'll come into us, we'll do a centralized intake, and we'll refer them to the many other fantastic community partners. We're really about collaboration. And the last way is through that crisis stabilization. So one of our programs is crisis stabilization. So when a person comes in crisis, and as Barbara was talking about, our goal is to not just deal with the immediate crisis, but to identify the underlying cause. So we are going to help them determine, why are you hungry today? Are you stably housed? So we're going to get them fed. We're going to help them get stable housing. And then we're going to get them into a program that gets them the training and support they need to find a job, retain that job, and then maintain that job for the long term.
Talk a little bit about the training. How do you train someone who maybe has never had a job in their entire life?
Our STEP program is unique in that.
STEP?
Yes, Success Training for Employment program.
STEP.
And it is specifically designed for people with barriers to employment. So if a person's never held a job, has low education, has a criminal background, has substance abuse issues, we are able to work with them because we believe people aren't defined by their past. They're defined by what they choose to do today and who they seek to be tomorrow.
Well, that gets me right to Miss Stewart here, because she believes that if you ask the right questions, you can get the right answers, right?
I do. That's something that I really believe the right questions can change your life. And I had the honor of doing a program for Impact 100. I'm on the board of Impact 100, and I'm co-chair of communications. So we did a project last summer called The Impact of Impact 100, and we interviewed the people who benefited directly because an organization was given $100,000 grants, and UP, United Against Poverty, had been given one of those grants. So I interviewed, I think it was 4 people from the organization, and I was totally blown away by, number one, the questions that the organization was asking of the people, but also the new questions that the individuals were asking themselves. And Annabelle, you mentioned the referral stream. One thing I learned during those video interviews, which I know you guys have them up on your website, I believe, as well, those videos, so you can really see the impact. But people who took the program were referring people they knew into the program, because these people were saying things like, "You've changed. What's changed? I want to be the way you are. I want to be thinking the way you are. You seem so up now." I mean, it was hysterical. They actually used the word up, and then they sort of stepped back and went, "Oh, yeah, now I get what up's all about, why it's called Up Now." Because it's not just uniting against poverty, it's lifting everybody up. And people are seeing it in their circles and referring other
people. We'll be right back. We have Barbara Lowry, we have Miss Robertson, who's the executive director, and we have Laura Stewart. This is Stan Erickson.
I still can't get used to that clock over there. I still miss my signs over there.
What are you talking about?
There's a little clock that we have.
Okay, let me just explain, sorry for the interruption, but these mics have patterns on them. And this one stays straight, so it doesn't interfere with his mic. And these are on the side, so that's why, and I needed to change them, because you weren't.
I'm sorry.
No, not your fault.
No, you weren't
It's fine.
projecting your best voice with it straight, so,
Did I?
okay,
Okay.
all right.
You're good now. Don't
No,
worry.
you're good. Okay, when we come back, I'm going to go back to you and think of something that you want to say. I'll say, Barbara, there are many organizations, you've been involved in a few. Why this one? Okay, you can go into that again if you
We
like.
could talk about Sarah.
Yeah, talk about Sarah.
Because
Okay.
I kind of,
Is that okay?
Sarah is definitely one of the ones that referred other people.
Okay. And anytime you have something, just put a finger like this.
Okay,
And then go right over here and talk.
I think I will.
Okay.
I thought of something.
Good. Anything else you want to bring up?
I think I'd like to explain what makes our step class different.
Absolutely. After Barbara talks, I'll go right to you on that.
Yeah, because it's very
She's the
unusual
hero.
program.
She designed and wrote the entire curriculum.
No, I definitely had some expert help, but
She's too modest.
Yeah, Annabelle's background is
I know.
not the traditional executive director
I
background,
know.
as
She's
you
a
know.
lawyer.
So yeah.
I'm careful around her. I got
I'm a
two son-
recovering lawyer. I like to
I
say.
have 2 sons that are lawyers. The one son calls me every night, "Dad, why did you vote for him?" Every night he calls me, "Dad, why did you vote for him?"
That's a whole nother show.
We can't go there, Stan. We can't go
It's
there.
just the options. You know, I'm not that pleased either. What can I do?
So, mama's boy, daddy's boy, what is he?
He's a mama's boy,
That's
like
what
I
I
am.
thought, yeah.
Yep, my
Okay.
Do you
younger son's
understand
dead.
his concept?
Yes, I have his book.
His other book
He's
is
defining
mind blowing.
people.
Yeah, why we elect mama's boys as presidents.
Of the last 10 presidents, 8 have been mama's boys. Self-identified. Trump's a mama's boy, pretends he's a daddy's boy. That's his problem. Trying to be a man. I'm in charge. I'm tough.
And he takes the concept
The
a
real
little bit
man
into here.
is
but-
tough. Your husband's a real man. They're just tough. They don't have to pretend they're tough. They're tough.
No, I don't think politicians have a tendency to be men's men. Like, because the necessity for being a politician requires you.
That's what I write about. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's what I said. It's a skill set.
Has anybody ever disputed your theory?
No, they don't dispute it, but they disagree. I think it's a DNA. I don't think the environment does it. It just exacerbates or enhances it. but I think it's DNA. You're born that way.
I think the only argument would be what you call it.
Yeah, they would say attachment to mother or father, and I'm doing that so I don't sound pejorative. It's not pejorative for me to think I'm a mama's boy. Bill Clinton said, I'm a mama's boy. I love being a mama. I don't think it's pejorative. A great mother.
You are still speaking very softly
I know, I'll try.
from the diaphragm.
Okay, this is the last spot. It's 30 seconds, Stanford, and we have a new rejoin. It's Beverly saying you are listening to the mayor of the airwaves. So
Okay.
I'll cue you after that.
Will do.
tccinc.org. Call 772-257-8224. tccinc.org is a not-for-profit 501.
So not used to how prepared Stanford is.
257-8224.
You are listening to the mayor of the airwaves.
Hi, this is Stanford Erickson again, sitting in for Rhett Palmer, and we're talking about how do we lift people up rather than help them where they are, but we want to uplift them. And this is United Against Poverty we're talking about. And Beverly Lowry, you're the chair of this Vero Beach organization. How does this really help, and why did you get involved again?
Well, philanthropy is something that helps and uplifts the person who provides it in addition to the person it serves. And I receive so much from this opportunity because I can actually see the results of our organization's commitment to the people we serve. I had the absolute privilege and joyous experience on Saturday.
This Saturday?
This past Saturday,
Okay.
when Sarah, who came to us originally less than 2 years ago, who started out at the Samaritan Center that provided her...
That's a Roman Catholic center for homeless people. Is that? I believe that's what it is.
Yes, and they provide housing with caveats of required performance, which is very much in the same spirit of our organization. Sarah came to them. She had a toddler. She was 9 months pregnant. She had no home and a very dismal future. And they referred Sarah to us. And through her dedication, and again, I always say this, we provide the ladder, but our clients do the climbing. And she achieved self-reliance. She now has a wonderful job.
Piper Aircraft, I believe, right?
She works for Piper.
Which
and
is a great organization here in Vero Beach.
And the amazing thing is, as happy as Sarah is to be working at Piper, that's how happy Piper is to have Sarah working for them. And so now, because Sarah has worked so hard to achieve this success, we were able to attend the ribbon cutting ceremony because she qualified to purchase a Habitat for Humanity home. And all of us were there.
I've got goosebumps. That was pretty amazing.
All of us were there to celebrate her success. And the best part of it is, now she is a world-class role model for her children. And she has broken the cycle of poverty for herself and for the generations of her family to follow.
That'd be Annabelle Robertson. How do you take someone in that kind of role and then get them where they got?
Well, one of the most amazing things about Sarah's story is that it's an example of this community in action. It's an example of organizations doing what they do best, focusing on what they do well, and coming together to provide the resources. So Samaritan Center is an amazing housing program that provides people the opportunity to stay and to get stabilized, and then are encouraged to work and save money. By the referral into our jobs program, our job training program, STEP, we were able to there go my glasses. We were able to provide Sarah the foundation for not just attaining a job, but maintaining that job. We do that in step through a 3-phase program. And it's actually a 1 to 3 year program. It's not about simply getting someone a job. It's about providing the foundation, which includes emotional intelligence training, which is something completely unique to our program.
What does emotional intelligence mean? What's that?
Emotional intelligence is a type of training. It's a school of psychology that allows us to train soft skills. It really is using tangible skills training to teach people to understand their emotional triggers, their automatic negative thoughts, to understand what triggers them.
Can I send my wife through that? Oh, Nancy, I didn't say that.
So what triggers them isn't necessarily what triggers somebody else, which is the foundation of empathy. And a lot of empathy is definitely, as we understand, the foundation of teamwork, and teamwork is critical for an employee. We have 72 employment partners here in the community, and I often talk to them. And when they ask about what is emotional intelligence, I often say, have you had an employee blow up on the job, have a big to-do, and storm off, and then come back the next day and ask for their job back? That's where emotions become an issue to retaining the jobs. And that's what lots of employees have, lots of employers have had that situation. So what emotional intelligence does is train those employees not to have that triggered fight or flight mechanism, and to be able to control their emotions.
Beverly Osler, have you had emotional intelligence training?
Well, I didn't know you were going to ask that question, but what if we have a person listening and they know of someone who's suffering from poverty? How do they contact you? This is kind of a difficult road for people to make sure that you are being contacted.
Well, in fact, it is probably the simplest road. We are located on US 1.
2746 US 1.
2746 US 1. And we have a life enrichment center. And the first thing that you do is you meet our intake specialists. And then there's someone who specifically sits down with you to identify your specific individual needs, and someone who will set a direction for you to navigate so that you can come out at the other end of the road independent and self-reliant and successful. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is that 100% of last year's graduates have obtained employment. And more importantly, 86% of them have maintained employment for a year or more.
Yeah, some of us haven't been able to do that. This is Stanford Erickson. I'm sitting in for Rhett Palmer. We'll come right back learning about United Against Poverty.
We should
Clear news.
mention the website and the phone number.
Yeah,
You've
I'll
got
get
more
you
time.
to that. We'll have more time. Okay, we have a break until 8:33. So if you want to get up and go to the bathroom or anything, you got 3 minutes.
The EQ stuff is very, very cool, because the cycle, right? How do they break the cycle? They don't know how to, they've not had that childhood, a number of them, where they saw it demonstrated.
EQ
very
is
cool.
fascinating because after World War II, Fortune 500 companies started examining why do we hire two people from the same school with the same background, and one of them is successful and one of them isn't, and the expense of job
Right.
retention. So they started pouring large sums of money into schools like Harvard and Yale to study this, and this is where the whole schools of thought on soft skills
Right.
comes from. And then in the 90s, when we were able to, MRI technology
We
allowed
okay?
us to
Yep.
scan brains.
I have a question for these ladies.
What?
Last year, now, I do shopping all the time at Harvest. Well, I call
We
it
can
still
talk
call it
about that,
Harvest.
yeah.
You were supposed to buy the building across the street and expand.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. We're trying to raise the money
We're
for
going to
that.
go into that
Oh, okay.
next. Yeah.
All right. I
And
was
mostly
just
because-
curious.
Mostly because, okay, we're bursting
Do you
at
want
the
to bring
seams.
up the
Yeah, I
food
know.
program? You want to bring that? And then Mr. B, when you bring up the food, would you mention, then interject, I shop there,
Yeah.
okay?
No, you don't shop.
Is that okay?
Huh?
You don't shop there.
Yes, I do.
Yes, he does.
You do. Oh.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Is that okay?
I shop there.
Or you don't want to?
Because the products are good.
Whatever.
And it
What's best?
basically helped us out because
You tell me what's best.
when
Oh,
we
no,
moved here
it's
to
fine.
Vero, we
Whatever.
I
You
got
rather
it.
not do
short.
that?
So,
Well, what the
Huh?
truth
I'm-
is,
but
No,
When
no,
you
whatever
go
you
with
want.
the-
And then what I want to
they
do
hand
is,
you a
I'll
box
get to
and you're
you on
supposed to
what
say
is
thank you.
horizon for,
When you
what's
go
coming
to
up.
us,
Well, that's
you make
And then you
the
talk about
choices
the building,
that
things
you
like
do.
that. But do you want to do the shopping?
And you
I
have the
also-
we should talk about
responsibility for the choices
Barbara
you make.
likes
and I
to
also support your program
focus
by
on
paying
our
for the stuff.
employment.
And
I know,
it
but
goes into your
he shops there,
intake
so
program.
we get Mr. B involved.
We can talk about the 40% of the population in Indian River County that struggles to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Because really
No,
that's
that's
And then
okay.
we'll-
That's okay,
And then,
Stafford.
no, we'll do that.
I know
want-
he come.
But I want you to talk then.
Barbara.
No, I understand.
Well, yeah, I was just wondering.
Because he
what
called you
happened.
Beverly.
No, and then we'll
I know,
switch
but-
into
He
what's
was
up
gonna
now,
throw
and
it to
then we can
Beverly
talk
and
about the
then
building
changed his
program
mind
and
and
everything
went
like
to
that.
you.
It's okay.
Okay?
I still love
I know.
What's your first name again?
So
Annabelle.
you're referred to
Annabelle.
as
I'm wearing a
Marie.
tag.
My last name is
Okay, that's how
Bartosiewicz.
it's.
That's
You know
why I
what?
refer to
Even
That's
it.
what he
Rhett
called Mr. B.
cannot
Mr. B is
remember
good
names.
enough for
One
Rhett.
time he did
Bartosiewicz.
my name, and I
He's
worked with him a year
producer
and
on
a half.
television, radio.
I used to
We
be,
are so
yeah.
fortunate to have him.
Commercial.
I
Yeah.
can't
Oh,
realize
we're
it.
we're back
Back
on.
from news.
We're almost ready.
You don't, do you? Okay. There, now.
You can say
Beverly,
something
we're
to
almost
him.
there.
We're not back yet. He just needed to go back in the booth.
You know, one time we were on air.
So when the
Rhett,
human brain
you
could be
remember
tracked,
my
they
name.
I
began
wanted
to
to
see that the same
expand
portion of the
on my
brain that was being
answer
affected
about
by
the
this
employment.
executive
Okay.
training, because that's
We'll
what it
do.
ended up.
Then I want to switch
was
to
the
her
same
in terms of,
portion
because I
brain
want
that's
Mr. B, and then we'll go
affected by
back
adverse
to the
environments
building
in
program.
childhood.
Okay?
Okay, I can
So
do that.
abuse, neglect, and even poverty has been proven to cause decreased frontal lobe
Which would make
activity.
sense.
And so just growing up in poverty is an adverse environment. But it's been shown that that's the same portion of the brain that emotional intelligence training addresses. And so we actually have two mentor organizations, one in Minneapolis and one in Chicago, that started using what they term empowerment in their, which is a type of soft skills training. All of our program starts, and it's hard to go into it, and it would take me 10 minutes just to unpack
Yeah.
this.
No, I thought it was great that you brought it up, and the way you described it in that short time was enough to intrigue people. And basically, radio is about intriguing people, not giving the book. It's just giving them tidbits that make them want to reach out to you, go to your website, understand some more, and open their checkbook.
It fits my personality well. It's superficial. So if you're superficial, it works in radio. Right? Superficial is
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Although since my
Now, Rhett would make a song. Superficial today. We're superficial today.
Yeah. You know, this format tends to be, you've got the hour, so you can get more depth in.
Yeah.
But for
Thank
most
God.
radio interviews, they're 10, 15 minutes. Can't do very much in those.
Okay, this is the last spot. The open is next. Stand by in the studio.
Who are we going to first?
I'm
He'll
gonna
hand
go
off.
to Barbara first, then we'll go to you.
You're doing awesome. Really good.
That's your excitement, Sean. Yeah, you can do more. You're doing good. You're allowed to use your hands.
Oh, wait.
You know, it's fine.
Throw
You
your
talk with
glasses
your
on
hands.
the floor.
Okay.
Now, the most trusted name in radio, Rhett Palmer, the mayor of the airwaves.
If you just tuned in, it's not Rhett Palmer, it's Stanford Erickson. I'm sitting in for him, and we're talking about poverty, United Against Poverty. And Robert Lowry, we interrupted you last time. Keep going.
Well, one of the things I wanted to share with your listeners is part of the impediments that are imposed upon people who are trying to lift themselves out of poverty. We have a very generous society. Americans and people in Indian River County in particular are generous, and they provide a lot of money to a lot of organizations who serve people in need. The problem arises when a person first goes to work. What happens? They lose a lot of the assistance that they previously enjoyed. At sometimes, people sitting on the couch are in better financial situation than people who first start to go to work. So one of the things we have to do is help them through that period. And it's a hard period. And they're now experiencing problems that they never had to deal with before. Transportation. How are they going to get to work? Who's going to take care of their children? Who's going to be providing them with food stamps if they earn too much money? So one of the other things that we do, which helps us help the people we serve, is to support them through those very difficult times.
We want people to be self-reliant, but it's difficult if you've been raised in a household where no one's been self-reliant for maybe a couple generations, right?
Well, yes, and also many of our clients have such low self-esteem that they believe that they aren't worthy of a better life. And part of what we do is to remind them how worthy they are, the value that they have to the world, to the community, and to their children. And once they absorb that, they feel empowered. They feel motivated to start this journey. And the other thing that Annabelle's team has done is they have supported our people while they're first starting their jobs to let them know this is just their first job. It is not their forever job.
Annabelle Robertson, Executive Director, what are some of the steps? You said there's a step program, but how do you accomplish this in a short period of time, right?
One of the things that Barbara is speaking about is our member share grocery program, which is a nonprofit grocery program that allows families to save about 65 to 70% of their family's food budget in any given month, which allows them to redirect that money to other things such as childcare, utilities, rent, or savings.
You have a grocery store?
We do. We have a 6,000 square foot grocery store here in North Vero on 29th Street.
Can anybody?
No, not anyone can shop there. It's have to financially qualify. It is designed for people who are struggling financially. We use the federal poverty line guideline, and if somebody is making less than 200% of the federal poverty line, they will qualify to shop in our program.
And they come into your office and document that? And then
Yes, they have to go through, file a membership application and establish that. And then they get a card, just like a Sam's Club or a Costco, and they have to have that card to check out. If somebody wanted to come in and see the program, they could come in, but in order to check out, they need to have their card with them.
Mr. B, are you aware of this program?
We did shop at Harveston. Let me tell you, the quality of the food there, you would think that that's going to be a handout distribution center. Well, not really. It's Winn-Dixie, Publix, Trader Joe's, their meat, all of the major food chains here in the area support the fresh bread. It's not stale bread. It's fresh bread.
Annabelle, now they have more money so they can pay for transportation or other things. How else do you uplift them?
Well, as I was saying before, in our STEP program, we have the first step, which is classroom training, and the second step, which is job placement through our job developer. And lastly, we have a success coach that works with our participants for 1 to 3 years in our STEP program. And her focus is on job retention and support. So she is what we like to term an accountability partner. She helps to hold them accountable to a career plan, which is what Barbara was talking about, moving somebody up in their career, making sure they're doing training internally if their company requires that to qualify for a promotion, or making sure they're getting external vocational training or post-secondary education or a GED if that's required. 44% of our graduates are currently enrolled in post-secondary education. So we keep them directed. We also have job retention support, which means that, as Barbara was talking about, if you've never held a job before, working 40 hours a week is a new experience. And sometimes you need somebody when you're having your car breaks down or you're having trouble with childcare. You're like, I don't know what, I just want to sit on the couch, forget this. You need someone who's going to say, no, you were...
What, do they call the person?
Yes,
or?
They meet with them monthly in person. They have weekly phone calls, and they come to a quarterly workshop. And that goes on as they develop in their job. Our first goal is to get a person to 1 year of employment, and that's celebrated. And then it is to move them to 201% of the federal poverty line. Again, our goal is to work them out of the need for other financial support.
Barbara, what's for the future? I mean, what's the next pressing thing that you're trying to do here?
Well, nothing breeds success more than success. And we're pretty much bursting at the seams right now. Because the program...
How many people are in the program?
Well...
We see 600 people a day on our campus.
600 people. That's bursting
Per
at the
day.
seams. Per day.
Yes, and that's actually more than any other nonprofit in the county. That's more people than any other nonprofit in the county serve. What has happened is because our participants need a lot of a one-on-one, our class sizes are relatively limited. Therefore, we can't serve more than 25 people in a class 6-week program at a time. We're very much hopeful that we will be able to move into our new building in a timely fashion so we can expand our space.
Where's the new building going to be?
The new building is actually directly across the street from our existing building, and it's around the corner from the county administrative building.
That's a
For
nice
those
area.
that have lived in Vero a long time, it's the old Scotties. So that's what most people know it as. It's currently owned by Hale Groves.
Yes, I know that building.
And we're hoping that once we get into that new program, we'll have so much more classroom space, so we will be able to serve.
Would you move the food program there as well? Or?
Absolutely. Our grocery store, which is so phenomenal in that it doesn't just provide canned goods, it's fresh produce. We would be able to increase the number of people who can utilize that building with adequate parking to about 1,000 people a day. Is that correct?
In the building as a whole was what we expect. We'll have all our programs. We have space for 12 community partners, including a medical clinic, behavioral health.
These are other organizations that you would house there? Is that?
Yes, we want to
So it's a one-stop shopping sort of?
Absolutely, Stanford. And we're very excited. We've actually finished phase 1 of our capital campaign. So we funded the purchase of the building. Yay.
That's awesome.
And
Laura understands that. You've been helping do things like that for a long time,
Yeah.
right?
I have.
But so we're moving into phase 2, which is funding the build out of the building, and we're really excited about that. And we will have our grocery program. We will have a new business entrepreneurial training center in there. We will have classroom programs, our STEP program, which will be able to train about 300 students per year. We're currently training about 100 per year.
Barbara, how can people get involved in this? You're the chairperson, so you got to finance this, right?
Yeah, and of course I have the best job because I can be the cheerleader and brag about what our fabulous staff does, and I don't really have to do any of that part of the work. But clearly, it costs money. We get no real funding from the government.
We'll be back in about a couple of minutes, and we'll find out how you can help United Against Poverty.
So when we come back, I want to jump in for a second
Sure.
about something that Annabelle said, because I think it's important to stress that. Where you talked about with the expansion, there's going to be other things that you can provide, but I don't want people, the listeners, to think that there's other services outside of there that people can go to, like other clinics, other this, other that. What you're trying to do, my understanding, is make it easier for these people to get out of poverty.
But just so you do it fresh.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure you that thought process
I'll say
works
we're
for them.
back, and Laura Stewart has a point.
Okay.
Okay?
I think it's important to stress
But-
that.
You're kinder than ready to go. Stop!
We just have a few more. This is Bob, if you don't mind seeing
Okay.
him. 2 PhDs, great coming. The
Piles high indeed.
we want to tell them how they can interact to give money and get the website and get all that in. Okay?
Yeah, this is the
'Cause
last
This is
segment,
the last
it's
segment.
shorter.
This is your closing sell. Okay.
So you want to really be able to say very clearly how they can help you, where they go to help.
Oh, she's good at that. You don't have to worry.
Do you want the phone number for the Life Enrichment Center?
Whatever you want to say.
Could I borrow your pen? Sure.
Having fun, Annabelle?
Okay, so for my final segment is what, 1 minute? I just need to know, so I
Yeah, you just have about 1 minute. But we're going to go Laura first, and then we'll switch to you and do that. And then Annabelle can end. You're going to end. Okay?
Live on stage in the Privilege Theater Guild, May 11th to May
And you can see that.
I know.
So when you see it getting
See, I
close,
can't
just
see
know
it.
you
That's
need
No, that's the
to.
problem. That's why I went like that.
I didn't know if that meant 5 minutes or
Yeah,
5
that's
seconds.
5 seconds.
Yeah.
There's no minutes in this thing.
It got.
It's interacting with this is the most difficult thing. I mean, really, because you want to get something cogent, and you're breaking into this whole
So
thing.
you said I have 1 minute. Okay, I just want to make sure that I
Yeah,
get my point
You have
across.
about 1 minute. Well, we're going to start with Laura first.
Yeah, I mean the segment's about 10 minutes long, so.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm just new at this.
It's okay.
Oh, no, you're doing
Just
well.
follow the cues.
No.
You guys are doing great. You kidding
Yeah,
me?
no,
You're
no.
doing great.
Yeah, no problem.
Sons and Shine, 12th Street, $5 every day.
I had a great poem that I was going to do, but you're doing so well, I can't do it.
You can do it in the next segment.
I'll do it in the next segment. It's Mother's Day
Yeah.
poem, so
Yeah.
I don't know if those
Gotta-
PhDs want a Mother's Day poem.
These two guys that are going to be on the next segment, I interviewed one of them when Stanford and I
Yes,
covered for
they're
Lecture
absolutely
4,
brilliant.
and the
Genius
stuff that
IQ,
comes
both
out
genius
of their
IQs.
mouths,
Genius IQs.
I was just like, I never thought about it that way. Wow.
Genius IQs.
PhD economics, one of them.
Yeah, the other is ambassador to South Korea, so
Oh, wow.
that's appropriate to what's happening.
Yeah.
Cool.
And unreal. But they're fun. They're nice people. They live here. They're nice people. I usually with the deputy director of the CIA, former director, and he is a delight. So he's usually the one that comes on with me. And I just have to sit back and tell all these stories. Everybody's interested in that. How many people do you kill, deputy? Can't talk about that's a secret now.
Under which administration was he the ambassador to South Carolina?
George H.W. Bush, and George H.W. Bush was a figurehead. So
Okay,
basically-
stand by. The last ad. Rejoin. Coming up.
That's it. You're on. We're
Hey,
on.
this is Stanford Erickson for Rhett Palmer. I'm sitting in, and Laura Stewart has a point to make in terms of trying to lift up people.
You know, Annabelle, when you were talking about the new building, you and Barbara, and it's exciting that you got the funding to buy the building. Now the real work goes in, which is putting together and getting the rest of the funding. What I think is so interesting is that you're putting all these different services that are needed in one place for people, and I don't really know that everybody totally understands how important that is. You know, if you've in poverty, transportation's a major issue. Even though we have a wonderful bus service, if you've got children, it's finding somebody for that. So if people who are trying to be lifted up out of poverty can go to one place, get everything they need from whatever organizations are needed in one place, it takes that pressure off of them and makes it easier for them to follow the program, to lift themselves up out of poverty. And I just really want to make sure that that's stressed, because I don't know, when I heard that I was like, at first, why would they do that? There's all these other groups that might be putting programs together, but it sounds like if you can put it in one place,
it's
greater success.
And it will be those partners. It's
Right.
not us.
But
We're
it's in
not
one
doing the
place.
work.
Yeah.
You know, it will be whole family health and be mental health, and it will be Veterans Council and Healthy Start. These are community partners who will be on site. We're just providing space.
That's perfect.
Right. So it's as we know, poverty is defined by a lack of access to resources, and our goal is to provide those resources in a place where they come every week, and that creates relationship. Relationship is really the foundation of community, and community is the foundation of accountability, and accountability is the only basis for real change. And we can only do that because we have food. Our food program provides people the opportunity to come to us every week.
She sounds like a poet. You know, she's really a lawyer, but she does that very well. Barbara Lowry, how can people help? How can they be useful?
Well, on a day-to-day basis, all our funding for our programs comes from philanthropy. If it weren't for the generosity of our donors, we wouldn't be able to provide these services. Our grocery program is self-sustaining, but every dollar we need for the expertise that we provide our clients has to be provided by donors. So that's the first step. We're anxious to bring more people into our donor pool. The second part of it is to get into this.
If I have $1 million, I can call you. Is that right?
If
Please.
You hear that? There's some of you in Johns Island that have $1 million like that.
We desperately need help.
Yes, we desperately
From a
need
funding
help
perspective.
to retrofit our new building. You know, we're not a pretty capital campaign. We're not the theater. We're not the museum. We're not the hospital. That there's nothing self-serving in providing funds to our organization. But what you do is provide for the greater good of our entire community. And
You should still give there, because I love to go to the Riverside Theater. So give there. Keep going. However, you can help here as well, right?
we do. I would love to take you on a tour. I would love to show you our plan and work. And if you'd like to arrange for a tour, you can call us at 564-9365, and Annabelle and I will be happy.
What's the phone number again?
564-9365. And I look forward to having the opportunity to show you how your dollars can help those who are struggling to lift themselves up.
Do you have various like galas or parties or things like this that people can get involved with as well?
We do. We do a step appeal at every gala. Our gala is tied into the Valentine Ball, which is this year will be February 11th, 2018. And all the money raised from that event goes into supporting our programs. We have the Burgers and Brews event, which is the first Saturday before
It's July 1st.
July 1st. In July, where we are just trying to bring the community together so we can all learn more about each other and give you the opportunity to learn about what we do.
And we also have the Turkey Trot, which is every Thanksgiving morning here in Vero Beach. About 1,500 people get together in Riverside Park and run a 5K, and all of those funds go to support the programs at United Against Poverty.
You know, the raising money, this I've never been in a community where people are so generous. But Laura, it would seem that if there's any program, philosophically, I believe in self-reliance. I came from poor people. I came from farmers, and I just wanted an opportunity. And these are people that are probably, they didn't have folks like I had that could give them that sort of idea that they could do it themselves, and they can. So this sounds like a program that we should get involved in, right?
I really believe in it. You know, I've Barbara's talked to me a few times, and I've helped out a little bit. I'm on a couple of other boards, but I really feel that United Against Poverty is one of those groups in town that you can really see very quickly the difference in somebody's life. When I interviewed these people,
These are a mirror of the soul, right? And so when someone's really down, you can see it in their eyes, but you can only see it when they're joyful.
but
right?
you know, it wasn't just people who are the typical profile of poverty. One of the people I interviewed had, advanced degrees, and a child died, and they went into such a deep depression, they lost everything. This is not, poverty doesn't just affect the people you think it affects. It can affect the person right next door. It could happen to you in an instant. And I think that's why this organization is so important.
Well, that's why that emotional intelligence is an important factor, and you do that right away, right, to assess people.
We do 40 hours of emotional intelligence training in our STEP program, and our goal really is that people understand their value. We want every person to understand that they are valuable and important, and as God designed them to be, and we want them to recognize that value, and we want to be able to move them forward from that point.
Well, we'd like to get the phone ringing and people bringing in money today and wanting to get involved. Barbara, the phone number again is what?
564-9365.
And they can ask for Annabelle Robertson right away, right?
Yes, we
please
will.
do.
We will get to her, and we'd really like to get your email address, because we have lots of good news to share with you. And so when you call, if you provide that, we will keep you abreast of what's going on at UP.
You know, there are many good organizations in this town, but this seems to be one of the better ones that we should get behind. And you that are listening here, you've been so generous, Vero Beach, but think about calling today, getting involved today. Why not help out? I mean, all of us have been so lucky to live here. This is Stanford Erickson for Rhett Palmer. Thank you for listening. We'll be back.
I want you to know the next guest,
Clear.
the meter reader, just came and he was listening to you on the radio. The meter reader had his radio on in the car.
Thank you.
Very good. Stanford, you're getting the hang of this.
I'm starting to know how to sign on, sign
Very
off.
well, you're very on.
Good to have
Good to see you.
the other.
I'd like to take the tour.
Oh, it's right behind.
Right
Just
there.
felt like it needed to happen, so it just came out of my mouth.
Okay.
Okay, do you have
Let me.
a card?
Yes, I'm going to
You
give
do
you
have
my
a really
card.
amazing
And then call me.
organization.
Oh, it's in the other room.
I'm also
Okay, we
the
have to
public
change the
information
shape.
officer
Take your
for
water.
Vero Beach Amateur
Okay,
Radio
did you do
Club.
good?
Oh, we love you guys.
And we always take care of the
I
turkey
know.
trot and take care of the radios and
I know, you guys
Not
are amazing.
until
and you're helping us out
What
too,
we're gonna
because,
ask for
I
work
You're
is-
contacted,
staying, Laura.
I'm staying.
is
in your
for
office,
money
Stephanie, is it?
to outfit
She's in on
a
February.
portion of
No.
the building.
Susie.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
or
one of the
okay,
girls,
but we
she
know that
okayed.
there's a 2-year
We have a
timeline.
field day every year
Okay.
in
And
June,
since
the
we
last weekend in
haven't
June.
settled on the building
and,
yet,
we're getting
I thought you
bread
bought the
and
building.
rolls and stuff from you
We're under
guys and also
contract.
sales.
They're still in the
So
building. We can't
Okay.
actually
Happy to do it.
close
You
on
help
the
us,
building
we help you, so.
until this
Yeah, we're happy to
next summer.
support other nonprofits.
So we are
in
not
town
going to
and
move
help.
into
You
the
guys are such
building
a
until
help.
the
You're
end
such a
of the
help with the
first
bike
quarter
race last year.
2019.
Yeah, and I understand
so
this
you
would
year it's
apply
a
for a
cross-country
grant
one,
in
so
fall
we
of
can't be doing
18.
that.
Because if
And
we
then we'll do
apply
next
Next
to,
year,
We'll do
yeah.
a
we
little-
wouldn't
That was
be
fun
done
last
in
year. I
time.
was actually
Do you know what I'm saying?
at one of the checkpoints
And we want
before
to, we
on
want to
16th
apply for a
Street,
grant that's
when it turns to
appropriate
17th Street, and the railroad crossing got stuck down.
and
Oh, no.
So we
really, I
had to
know
have the
what
police come, and
Did you get your card?
so it's a good thing
it's
we
in the
did
other room. I'll
have
get it for you.
communications with radio.
Thank you, Annabelle. We make a good tag team, don't we?
You are
And
good.
this is,
Is
there
that
was
your
no,
It is.
Mine's in the other
no
room.
timed element to this show, so I'm
Thank
gonna
you,
edit
Pete.
this
Thank
and,
you. Okay, don't forget to send me
Very
that
nice.
and
email.
rebroadcast
Yep.
it during the
I will.
summer when Rhett's gone.
Okay. So,
Hi, how are you?
Robertson, nice to meet you.
I'm on the left.
Oh, you're on the left. Okay.
That's what Stan said.
Okay.
Nice to see you
Good to see
again.
you.
I'll sit anywhere.
okay, I'll-
Anywhere they want me.
She didn't use her water. So
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
I'm Laura Stewart.
Laura?
Hi.
you
Nice
have
to see you,
enough
Dave.
water, Lauren?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Do you want your water?
I got it.
Now, are these things safe to
Oh,
move again or
okay.
not? Shouldn't?
Just this
A little
way.
bit. Okay, little. I know that one time I did this and
You've done
the,
this before.
the thing
This
kind of
is-
fell apart.
Yeah, yeah. You just got to move them from up here.
But at least now you don't have to wear the headsets all the time, right?
Yeah.
No,
That's-
because we don't have anybody calling in.
Oh, okay.
That's
Was
the
that the
only-
reason that you used to
Well,
have
if you want
call-ins?
to
Yeah.
hear the booth, if
Oh.
Mr. B is trying to talk
have
or
to be-
do something,
You are on Facebook.
got to
Yeah.
hear that.
Okay, this
Yeah.
is Facebook.
Okay.
You're both on.
Yeah, we're live on YouTube and Facebook right now as we're.
Oh, we're
sitting here.
live.
Okay.
She's a pro.
Yeah. So you have to behave yourself.
Well, yeah, because you're on video.
Right. Okay.
So don't do anything strange, right?
Well, you can also get iPod or podcasts of this somehow, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna turn this off, get our phones off here.
And make sure your phone's on vibrate.
Yeah, I didn't bring a phone, so
That's even smarter.
that's smarter. Yeah, I don't.
And I think I've seen you around the studio before.
Oh, yeah,
I
I've-
don't think I've interviewed you when I was when Stanford and I were covering for Rhett together before. I
No,
know
I-
Rob and I did, and I was just blown away by him. And
Too much.
at some point, I'm going to have you on my own show.
That'd be great.
By the way, Stanford, besides the topics that we've got, which are pretty meaty topics,
sure.
I wanted to see if we could throw in a little shout out about this situation. This is Dr. Afradi. Now, Dr. Afradi,
Is he the one that saved the?
he's the one that helped us catch
Yes,
Osama
and
bin
he got
Laden.
released, huh?
No, he didn't get released.
Oh.
He's been in jail ever since Osama bin Laden was captured. Okay, and this is one of the huge travesty of justice.
I agree with that 100%.
Absolutely. So anyway, I'd like to discuss this because
I-
Trump is now taking action. He said in his comments, Trump did, that he'd get Friday out in 2 minutes. And of course, Obama. This is one of these cases where if a president is interested in something and willing to push hard, he can achieve something. We've got these big problems with North Korea and Saudi Arabia and all this stuff, but this is a personal tragedy because this is somebody that worked for our CIA to help us capture Osama bin Laden and our friend, the Pakistanis, our ally.
Well, you were in Pakistan.
Yeah, I
right?
was in Pakistan. Our ally, the Pakistanis, threw this guy in jail, and he's been sitting in jail ever since
Oh my gosh.
for treason.
Stan, there's one other thing I want to mention too. We got 1 second.
I read your email
25 years ago,
you sent to.
Oh, yeah.
I
to Stan.
hosted Secretary Kissinger
It blew
for
me
the
away
NAFTA discussions
I was already
on firing line with
scared.
Bill Buckley.
Yeah.
about
wow.
what's going on
And
over
so
there,
I-
but your
I
perspective
did
and
research
the way
before.
you worded things
I picked him up at
made
the
it all
airport,
make sense all of a sudden.
and
Well, I'm hoping.
we had
I'm
an
hoping
hour
it
together,
makes some sense. There's.
and we went
We've-
over all this NAFTA.
we've got a
stuff.
lot.
I got to get your background.
Yeah.
I'll bring that in.
We've
I'll
got
get
a
that
lot
in.
of
Don't worry.
Okay.
international
I just
problems,
looked at the
and
plans.
this inside the Beltway turmoil over who said what and why, or leaked what to whom. That's not helping us, because we really do not need to be focusing on that level of minutia. Yeah, you can spend a lot of time discussing it, but the reality is that we get distracted from being able to deal with the big problems that are out there.
I think
And-
that's a great point to bring out
Yeah.
today. And you've got to put this in perspective.
We'll get out left.
Yeah. What you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, one of the questions I have is
Yes, I
what
met
Trump's
Kevin
doing
too a
and
few
all this
times.
stuff
Oh,
that's
okay.
going?
So
Is
he's
it
a
a
great guy. We
tactic
had a great
designed
meeting.
to
Oh, he is-
distract us
he
from
is absolutely
other
brilliant.
stuff that's going on in the background?
But we'll
Talk
get into that too.
directly-
So if you
Directly
want
into
to
it.
get into that.
Right.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah, no,
Move
that's
it
fun.
from
I'll
up
move
top.
it over a little
Yeah.
bit for
There
you.
you go.
It just occurred to me.
What we
after
want
all
to do
this.
is have fun.
You beat a
Okay.
traffic cop.
Yeah.
We just want to have
That
fun.
sounds good.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why this one is this way.
I
I
know.
don't know if you knew the reason.
Thank you.
Am I sideways or what?
Yeah, these two mics have to be sideways.
Can we get that on again? Or how
It's
do we do-
on. It never went off.
Oh,
Just if you
yeah.
just touch the screen anywhere, you'll see it. See, it's
Okay.
on
So you just
Oh,
have
this
to-
is what you see.
on
Yeah,
YouTube and
YouTube.
YouTube. You can watch. You
Facebook,
can go
yeah.
watch
Oh, that's
yourself
cool.
after.
Smile,
Here's-
you're on
So,
camera.
camera,
And
camera,
you have to
camera.
talk right into.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're biting it.
Here's another thing that's interesting. This is Voice of America.
Yeah.
Blacklisted North Korean companies doing business with China.
Yeah.
You brought your own mug?
I did. That's the Korean
That's
U.S.
cool.
Embassy, Korea. Yeah.
That's just cool.
Anya Hashimika. I can say Anya Hashimika.
Yeah.
Little things.
Yeah. Well, they're mementos of your career.
It's just not something that the average person
Sam,
sees.
what else do you want to
Stand
say?
by.
Why I
Open
take
is next.
picture of it.
I'm going to start with. I'm going to introduce all of you, but I'm going to start then with David.
Yuri Minjuk Kiri. That's the North Korean statement for "We are one tribe forever."
Typical dictator. Thank you.
Hey, it's Stanford Erickson in sitting in for Rhett Palmer. I know you miss him. He'll be back soon. But you're going to have a very interesting time now because we have some very brilliant people here. They're going to talk about some current events. Korea is on everybody's mind right now, and we have David Hunter, and he's a retired U.S. diplomat who served in the embassies and consulates of South Korea, India, Ukraine, Pakistan, Spain. David, what's happening in Korea? What's going to happen in Korea?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Stanford.
But I'll say Anya Hashimika first,
Yeah.
because I was in Korea for 1 year, 15 months
Well-
in the U.S. Army, courtesy of the U.S. Army.
Well, the situation there. Thank you. The situation is extremely complicated right now, and that's why I think it's good that we talk about it on the program. As you may have seen, the North Koreans have been conducting missile tests and nuclear tests over the last couple of years, and are moving rapidly to developing the capacity to have a long-range ICBM missile loaded with a nuclear warhead, which can strike the United States. So this changes the equation for the U.S. Substantially. Now, the history of North Korea's nuclear weapons development has been going on for quite some time. I mean, the first nuclear test was done in 2006, and they did another test in 2009, one in 2013, and then two last year. So you can see the speed of testing of nuclear weapons has accelerated. And part of this is aiming at miniaturization so that they can get it down to a size that can be loaded onto a missile and fired at us. So,
Well, the latest missile's pretty big, isn't it?
well, the missile that they just tested, there are two types of missiles that they've got. I'm not an expert on that, but generally speaking, they've got a solid fuel missile, which they have just tested last year and launched from a submarine. So you've got now North Korea moving into the ability to have submarines with missiles launched from those submarines. That's very complicated technology. And you also have the what you call the standard Rodung it's called the Rodong-2 missile, which is a liquid fuel missile, but which is sort of a general all-purpose Scud, but longer range than a Scud. And they're moving towards developing that. This last test that went up to almost to Vladivostok, I believe that is what's called an NK-8, which is a longer range, sort of like an intermediate range ballistic missile. So the Koreans, the North Koreans, are developing a threatening capability, and it's coupled with a very unstable leader, Kim Jong-un. And
among many unstable leaders.
Well, unstable leaders, but in particular. So you know, the U.S. has played what I call the sanctions footsie game, also known as the six-party talks that we held with China and North and South Korea and Japan. This group held what's called the six-party talks. Russia was included in that for almost 20 years. On and off. And many times the North Koreans would say, okay, well, we're willing to dismantle the Yongbyon nuclear reactor. And they went through that, and under George W. Bush, they were in the middle of dismantling it up until 2008. And Bush gave them a benefit of removing them from Trading with the Enemies Act and other economic incentives. In fact, at the same time, as we'll talk about later, the South Korean government and the United States gave equivalent of $4 billion of aid to North Korea
in terms of food.
In terms of food and things.
They're
starving. That
right?
was part of the concessions to get them to cooperate on a denuclearization. That was the goal of the United States. But in 2008, at the end of 2008, the U.S. Was surprised to find that the North Koreans tossed the IAEA inspectors out of the Yongbyon nuclear facility, removed the seals, conducted another, by 2009, they conducted a second nuclear test.
Well,
so essentially, they played us.
They had another president then, and they weren't too fearful of that president.
Well,
right?
this happened under both. George W. Bush was as taken in as Obama was about the promises of a peaceful or willing to denuclearize North Korea. So it's not just one president. This is a bi-party con that we have been misled on. So now we're at the stage where after lots of sanctions and lots of trips, and we've turned to China repeatedly in the past. We're now at the stage where the last best gasp is again to turn to China, because the alternative to having help from China is facing a war with preemptive strikes or whatever in between North and South Korea, and that's an awful scenario. The scenario of looking at what could happen if there's a war, we're talking. Some quotes have been that there'll be 1 million people killed.
Let's come back to that, but
Yeah.
I also want to introduce Laura Stewart, who is my co-host. She has her own program here. Laura, how are you today?
I'm good, but you know, I hear what Dave's saying, and all these questions go through my mind, right? Is North Korea acting alone? I mean, I have this in the back of my mind. I keep saying to myself, somebody else is benefiting by North Korea ramping up the way it is. I can't imagine that they're completely doing this on their own. I mean, how do you, in the world of international politics, start to understand all these undercurrents? Our own government is so convoluted with the politics and who's in it for this moment and that moment, and who's getting this piece so we can get that piece on a world scale. You know, China going into the China Sea and building those little islands, I would think that it's to their benefit to let North Korea escalate, because then they can get something else they want.
David, what do you think?
And in 5 minutes, we're going to be dealing with the China issue.
I think Laura's hit on a very good point. There is a strong possibility, at least in the early stages, that the Chinese were using the North Korea troublemaker as a tool to get concessions from us over things that the Chinese wanted. So in other words, they had a little aggressive pit bull, if you will, and they were willing to pull in or rein in that pit bull if we would give them concessions. And some of the concessions that are under discussion now are things such as the removal of the currency manipulator status, as Laura mentioned, the possibility of going light with them on the South China Sea expansions that they've been pressing very hard for. Also, currency and unfair, not just currency, unfair counterfeiting, which China has been accused of in many cases. There are lots of things that China can benefit from. So they might have been using this as a tool to some extent for their own benefit. However, I think if that's the case, China has, the dog has slipped the leash.
Isn't that what always ends up happening?
Well,
I mean,
My wife always says that about me. The dog has slipped the leash. I like that.
well,
I mean,
well,
how many times have we funded
meaning-
people that we thought would help stabilize a region,
Well,
and then all of
so-
a sudden they're now the king of the hill and turning against us?
So China may be regretting that fact. The question is, as you mentioned, does China really want to rein in North Korea? My question, maybe we get to this a little later, is can China rein in North Korea? Does it have the ability?
Also, we have with us Robert Edminster. He's a PhD. He's a retired university professor dean. He's also worked for the Fed and extremely knowledgeable about business cycles and where our economy is. Nice to have you, Robert.
Good morning, Stan.
And this is all going to affect the economy, right? Worldwide? Here?
Absolutely, it will. And we've seen a recent example of the impact of politics on the economy. The elections in France had a significant impact on the value of the euro. Prior to the election, the euro was trading.
Well, we'll hold
very
that
low.
thought. We're going to come back. This is Stanford Erickson sitting in for Rhett Palmer.
What a tease.
We'll come right back.
Hear the
That's,
rest.
no, that's fine.
No, we'll come right
So I
back to
was
that.
using the stuff that you wrote. It made
Right.
me leap to all these different directions that I never even thought of.
Right.
But yet it was there in the back of my mind because I
Yeah.
read a lot of espionage novels.
Right.
And
Well,
it's like they're predicting these espionage. We're seeing it now.
It's
Yeah.
it's really unsettling.
yeah. Well, and I mean, this issue of the economy, we can get off on that a little bit because, frankly, if we have a war with North Korea, that is going to probably draw China in as a defender of North Korea, most likely.
They've done it before.
And if that happens, we're talking about a total collapse of the global trading system.
And
Because
China,
we can't be trading with China at the same time that we're fighting with
Okay,
China.
we're going to get back to Bob, and you're going to talk a little bit about that, and you can jump in on that.
Okay.
What
yeah.
do you want me to do?
You
On
talked
the
about the
economy,
French.
what's happening in the economy right now, and how world politics affects the economy.
and doesn't China own most of the debt for most of the major countries?
Huge portion of it.
So if they were to call it because they don't like the fact that
If we were in a
we're-
conflict with
Yeah.
China, we might be in a shooting war with China. It could happen within hours if they started to.
Go wherever you want, and I'll get back to going. You talk where you want to walk.
I think it was
I'm going to
Tom-
get you
Tom
back
Clancy
into world
wrote a
economy,
book.
then
Okay.
I
get
think it was
to
Tom
the
Clancy
current administration,
on,
tax, and whatever's happening.
China
Sure,
doing
sure.
So the
a financial
election
war.
in France really had
You know,
an
where they
impact.
start buying
yes.
up everything in the
So
United
I'll
States.
pick up on that.
So
because
they have now
that
the
was
controlling
tease,
interest,
now-
and then
yeah.
they just literally
Yeah.
slam the
Yeah.
economy by pulling back.
Well, they could. And Clancy's very well informed. You
Yeah.
know, that or whoever's writing his books now.
Yeah.
They're very well
That
informed.
book came out probably 7-10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, yeah, I can see this already
I don't
starting
need
to
to ask
happen.
any questions. These people are so smart.
So,
They are.
Everybody okay? Water,
Oh, yeah. We're doing
coffee?
good. Good.
I was telling Dave as I backed out of my driveway, the meter reader was there, and he had his radio on iHeartRadio.
You thought, I'm going to be on. Did you
Yeah,
tell him?
I should have said, hey, I'm going to be on. I got to go.
I'm amazed how many people listen. I just,
Yeah.
you know.
I do all the time.
Oh,
It
Laura
shocks me.
knows.
I just wish more people were interactive, you know, like
Yeah.
talk more, like if you heard something on the show,
Mm-hmm.
shoot an email, shoot a post, something.
Yeah.
They're listening
Well-
because eventually you hear something.
Well,
But
Rhett,
Lauren-
when Rhett was on, he would look and get a lot of comments sent to him on his Twitter account or something like that.
Facebook,
Yes,
Facebook
yes,
Live,
Facebook.
yeah.
I know, because
I know.
we would be talking and he would break and he would say, "My God, there are 50 comments on that."
Yeah, because he's been
Yeah.
doing the Facebook Live.
Okay.
I don't do Facebook Live on my show because 99.9% of my guests are remote.
Okay. They're
And
not,
we can't feed that into that computer
Okay.
based on the way the
Yeah.
studio is set up.
Okay.
So it's been really hard.
Right.
I can't do that live interaction stuff. It's fun when you can have people in the studio across from you.
There's nothing like real interaction
Yeah.
among people.
Yeah,
Great.
We've almost gotten too far away from that.
yeah. I wish that we could figure out how to rig it so that I could be looking at my guest via Skype.
Yeah.
I was just interviewed on OC Talk Radio
Right.
out in California, and they have a Skype feed into their studio. So they don't broadcast the video feed. They came in through Skype for the audio, but I
Last
could see the
commercial.
studio, and it was
Rejoin
fun
is next.
because
Stand by.
we could see each other. It was neat.
Recently had a family member who came to town, a young grandson. Turned out he had strep throat. We found out right away because we sent him to Indian River Walking Clinic at Miracle Mile. And everything was corrected and came out well. He's doing fine now, I'm happy to say. Indian River Walking Clinic.
My dad was in the Korean War, but he got stationed in
I'm
England.
pronouncing it right. Edminster.
That's good.
Edminster,
Edminster.
like Mr. Ed backwards.
Okay. Hey, it's Stanford Erickson again. We have some brilliant people in the studio, but Dr. Robert Edminster was speaking about how the election in France has affected the economy, world economy.
It's amazing what a tremendous impact it had. Before the election in France, the euro was trading for about 105 or 106, which is a fairly low level. I remember 4 or 5 years ago it was trading for 1.50. Okay, and so it's way down from what it used to be because of the instability of the euro system. But after the election, the new French Prime Minister immediately went to Germany and reforged the ties between France and Germany, and the euro is now up to 111. A 5% increase in a matter of weeks.
I read recently also on involving that, where they said, well, they're going to make this market stronger again. But how can you do that when you have Greece and Spain, in particular, where they don't, they have 20-30% unemployment? How can that affects the euro? Do you need a bifurcated type of euro, or how do you make it work?
Well, the euro is one currency for 22 countries.
Yes.
And of those 22 countries, there are 3 or 4 that are relatively small, like Greece, and they have a different view of politics and the role of government and so forth.
And in working too. I mean, working is not the top of the food chain in their thoughts.
Oh no, and they think their government job is more like, well, it pays me, but I don't have to do very much.
Yes.
Right. But that culture's changing as well, and it will take, generations really for it to evolve. And the golden perspective for the euro is that it will last through those generations and become a strong, stable, multi-state economy like the United States of America.
Yeah, but if the UK is now separating itself from that, doesn't that undermine that kind of thought process?
Oh, the UK was a huge shock to the euro, but bear in mind that Switzerland never joined the euro, and I think the UK is kind of like Swiss too. They're going to be the small country right next to the European Union, and they're going to be part of the financial relationship between the European Union and the rest of the world.
I never thought of that. It's just a little bigger Swiss cheese, right?
Right, right. And as people get accustomed to this, and as the Brits put in place a very strong currency system, which I think they will do, we will see this evolve.
David Hunter was pointing out that we might be, David Hunter, who's with the State Department for a number of years, serving in all major countries it seemed we were in trouble with, but he was pointing out that we could be at war, and how would this affect the economy here in the United States?
Oh, it'd be disastrous. The old axiom is you sell on the cannons and you buy on the roses, okay? And the cannons are beginning to be rattled out there. So if we do have any kind of a major war with North Korea or any of the other countries over there, it will cut off tremendous amounts of trade.
David, Kim's grandfather and his father both were educated in the Soviet Union in Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un was not. But
Right.
Russia seems to now be getting involved in this. Is this a wedge that they're doing it, and they're going to support and take the place of China?
Well, I don't think that they're about to take the place of China in the short term. Keep in mind that about 80% of Korea's economy is based on China-Korea trade. That's one of the things that gives us the hopes that the Chinese might have leverage over the North Koreans to roll back their weapons testing and their nuclear testing, is that the Chinese have economic leverage to pressure them. The Russians they have a common border with the Koreans, North Koreans. That's something a lot of people don't realize, that Russia and China have borders on North Korea. So the Russians have an interest in what goes on. You say, if the Chinese are afraid of all these people fleeing into across the border into China, well, they could also flee into the border into Russia. So Russia has an interest in what goes on up there, on that Yalu River area, especially. But the question of China as being the so-called the trump card, pardon the pun, that could help to rein in North Korea, that's a big question. I've looked at this carefully, and the Chinese have had a number of rather egregious infractions of the embargoes of North Korea that have been imposed by the United Nations. When you saw those parades of the North Koreans just recently, you saw those big trucks rolling around. Well, those big trucks are actually made by the Wanshan Special Vehicles Company in China. And they are essentially designed based on an old Belarus design for carrying ICBMs. And Wanshan Special Vehicles is part of a conglomerate in China that is specifically making defense products. So how would it, and now when they sold those to the North Koreans, they claimed that those were logging trucks. But suddenly you have a defense company in China selling these huge, and these are 16-wheel transport vehicles with independent suspension on each wheel and separate ability to inflate or deflate wheels. These are like for special high, maneuvering.
They're for bombs.
On road and off road, but handled very carefully.
We will come back in just a few minutes. We'll talk more about that, but also about Pakistan. This is Stanford Erickson for Rhett Palmer. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, very few people know
Clear
that.
into the news.
That's curious.
Very few people know that. Yeah.
What a sly trick.
But they've been planning it a long time.
Well, so the
it's
Chinese
really
government-
obvious they're
Do you
manipulating.
want to get into
Yeah.
the North Korean-Iranian relationship?
No, not really, because the North Korean Iranian, Iran is one of the bad boys, along with the North Koreans and the Pakistanis and the Chinese, and to some extent the Russians, and they're all playing in this defense industry with weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, all this bad stuff. Okay, and I don't want to get into that because then you get dragged
It's
into
too much.
Iran. Yeah, it's too much.
I'm going to get back. I'm going to get back to this, but I want to start with you in terms of talk about the economy today and the Fed and what the Fed's doing in terms of the assets you were talking about. And in June, they're going to have another Fed funds increase, and how that's going to affect things. And then we'll go back to what I'd like. Let's say, not only you're an expert in Korea, but you were in Pakistan for a while too. And let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, we can do that. We can.
Yes.
But,
So I'll do a little segment then on the Fed, right? That'll be the next thing.
right.
And if you want to talk about maybe the impact of all of this on the consumer, is that of interest?
Yeah, well, I had a question for Dave because of what he said with the Yalu River and Russia and China having the borders with
Yeah.
North Korea, and I think major portions of the population have no clue about that.
Right.
I mean, I just don't get, Russia just goes in anywhere. You know what I mean? The Ukraine, look at that situation. They
Right.
wanted it, they took it, they didn't like what was going on. What is their benefit for not stepping across that border? Because they're at risk. The bombs can reach them now, right? In North Korea, it'll only take a second. So there's a benefit
Okay.
for it not happening. If you don't want me to ask it, I
No,
won't,
no.
but that's,
we'll
that
we'll
just
get that in
came
the
through my
third.
head.
That'll be the third. We have another hour and a half. So we.
So we got plenty
I'll
of time
get.
to
I'll
cover
get back
this
to
stuff,
that.
yeah.
I'll
And
get
we've
back
got
to
to.
that.
And remember,
I'll
we've
get
got to
back
save
to
a
that.
little time for Dr. Afradi.
Yeah,
if
but
you
I
want
would
to talk
like
about
to
Pakistan.
this and
yeah.
Friday, and then we'll get back. When
Back
we
to
have our
the-
break, we'll get back to that again.
Back to the
But
Korea
what
situation.
is really most important? I mean, the general state of the economy or the Fed, or because if I range from topic to topic, it will be kind of difficult to follow.
Oh no, that's telephone. That's radio. They like going back and forth and everything.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
no, they have no problem. They don't. They're not linear.
Short attention span.
Short attention span. Believe it or not, they don't mind that. Just that's why Rhett's so good because he has his 80s. You know, he has a short attention. That's why he starts singing everything because
Right.
he has this thing in his head that they're going to get bored, and so he's always doing that, and he's great. He's absolutely right. That's her attention span. Think of the teenager,
Yeah.
which Rhett is.
Well, you see-
Sorry, Rhett.
I mean, listening to you guys
I
talk
know,
though just
we're in
blows my
trouble.
mind because it's
Yeah.
literally the questions you pose, the things you ask about what's going on makes me think of these other things that I never thought
Right.
of because I didn't know this data.
Yeah. Well, normally this kind of stuff does not get out of the halls of academia or halls of government. That's the thing. You know, they don't. It doesn't get out onto the street. And I'm being careful to fish through and find the stuff that would be useful to know, so that the average person could.
David is unique because he is an academic mind, but he's also dealt in the real world.
Right.
And most academics don't.
Now, you were ambassador to South Korea?
No, I
You-
wasn't.
You
no,
just worked in the
I
embassy?
worked. I was
Like professional
foreign
staff.
service officer. Yeah. Yeah. So.
You're the person that everybody turned to when they wanted to understand what was going on.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Right.
ambassador would do that.
Yeah, well, actually, we had some pretty impressive ambassadors. Donald Gregg actually was Bush's.
Is this the one that got slashed?
I don't think. I'm
Oh,
not sure.
oh.
Donald Gregg was an ex-CIA, high-ranking CIA officer who also served under George Herbert Walker Bush, like in the National Security Council, and later, after he left government, was president of the Asia Society, and he was the he was the ambassador, the first ambassador when I was.
I
in
knew the
Korea.
Asian Society well because Nelson Rockefeller financed it for years.
Oh.
The
Oh,
Asia
yeah.
Society.
Oh
yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I was close. Believe it or not, David Rockefeller, and I was close to David Rockefeller because I was the only one that could put up with his ego. All other
You're
journalists.
talking about Nelson Rockefeller.
No,
right?
David as well.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no, they.
I thought David was really charming. I met him, and he
That's
was.
from a journalist point of view.
Oh, okay.
Because
All right.
David was in charge.
I was not a journalist.
Yeah. So journalists,
Okay.
they don't like someone who's telling them what to
Okay.
do, and I would listen because I would like to know because he's
He was sort of the godfather of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Absolutely.
Stand by in the studio. This is
Okay.
the last spot. The open is next.
My brain doesn't think this way, so it's fascinating to sit here with you guys. You know,
Edminster, huh?
I'm the person
Edminster.
that empowers
Edminster.
people, and does all this other stuff, and to hear this, it's like, wow. It's like every espionage novel come to life.
Well, you know, sometimes real life is more bizarre than the far-fetched
Yeah.
stories of espionage.
Yeah.
Although Clancy is right on target. I mean, he's good.
We're back at Stanford Erickson, and we're talking about Korea. We're talking about current events. We're talking about the Fed and the economy. And let's go to Bob Ittminster, PhD. And you've worked in the economies, and you were a dean teaching students about this. What's happening to our economy right now?
We are in the probably the middle to later stages of a dramatic improvement in the economy. With the unemployment rate is down below 4.5%.
Is that the real unemployment rate, though?
Well, the real unemployment rate includes people that are not looking for jobs.
Yes.
And that is probably more like 7 or 8%.
Oh, that's not bad.
It's not too bad at all. And to get to a formal unemployment rate of 4.5% is quite good. Because remember, just a few years ago, it was about 7 or 8%. Okay. And it's just been going down quarter after quarter after quarter. Now, there are probably a lot of things that affect that, but the big thing is stability in the economy. And we've touched on that just a few moments ago about what war might do to the economy or what a disruptive political environment might do, right? And the hope that France is going to settle down now with a moderate government is so positive. Well, the United States actually has had a fairly moderate government the last few years.
You're an expert in the Fed. The Fed has affected our economy for a long time, good or bad?
The Fed's role is to be the stable monetary authority. When we have $1 in our wallet, we want it to be $1 tomorrow. And the Fed is doing that to a large extent. However, the Fed increased the money supply in order to reduce interest rates. It wanted to reduce interest rates so that people would borrow and then invest that money. And then that would give people jobs, because when you invest, you have to hire people to build things. All of that's been going on. But we're getting to a point now where the investments have been made and the people are employed. And we don't want to get to a point where the economy is so hot that inflation rears up its ugly head. Remember, some of you who are a little older, 1978, 1979.
Jimmy Carter, I had a mortgage, 17% house mortgage. I
That's right.
understand that. I remember that.
At that time, I was working for the U.S. Treasury's control of the currency. We received a formal report from the Fed. It was being circulated internally within the federal monetary agencies. And there was a 10% chance that the prime rate would go to 30%. That is, you would have to pay 1/3 of what you owe every year in interest.
That's like Brazil.
Yeah, it was really
Sounds
really
like a loan
awful.
shark.
That's Laura Stewart. She knows loan sharks, right?
So we don't want to get back into that kind of situation. And to avoid that, it's better to take a little bit of pain right now, shrink the Fed down. And that is the current topic within the Federal Reserve. We're pretty certain the Fed's going to increase the interest rates a little bit next period.
This is the interest rate they charge to the banks, right? And that affects us, or what is it?
What they can affect is the interest rate that the Fed pays the banks on excess reserves.
Yes.
Okay, and this is a bit technical, but it works very, very well. But the Fed really needs to get back to a point where it withdraws itself from the economy and allows the free markets to interact in a normal fashion.
Well, they have. I read a paper once that you wrote. They built up an asset war chest, which is sort of frightening, isn't it? Because if they start selling off those assets, won't that affect the economy?
It will have some effect on the interest rates. However, the Fed itself has said that it uses the interest rates that it pays on the excess reserves to determine the interest rates in the economy. So it's really disingenuous now for the Fed to come back and go, well, if we change assets, it's going to affect interest rates, after having said that doesn't affect interest rates. So there's a conundrum here.
Yeah, your feeling about that is what? If they start, what is it, 3 trillion or what?
It's $4.4 trillion
Yeah.
the Fed has grown to during this last 8 years under the Obama administration. And about 2 trillion of that was added in the form of collateralized mortgage obligations, which it never used to have any of. So it's added well over $2 trillion just to balloon the Fed's portfolio.
Well, the last time the government did that, we had this housing crisis, right? This boomlet, right, that sent us into recession.
You think we're not there today? I mean, just look around you at all of the housing that's being built, right? It's huge.
Especially here in Florida.
Florida, San Francisco, Seattle. I mean, you almost can't name a major city that isn't growing. I was talking to somebody from Madison, Wisconsin, and they're going into a housing boom right now, too.
Which is so strange because I just read in the newspaper the other day that millennials aren't buying homes. So isn't that the generation that these houses should be built, or is it the boomers that are buying second houses or moving in? I'm not quite understanding that economic piece and why the housing boom is building up when at the other hand we're hearing reports that people aren't buying houses.
Well, the reports are for areas where the housing prices have jumped up recently, and so people have pulled back from those markets. But why did it jump up? It jumped up because there's a shortage of inventory of houses for sale.
Okay.
So that's when the builders come in to supply new houses to increase the inventory.
Why don't we now switch just, and I'll come back to you because the economy fascinates me and I covered it for years. But David Hunter, you were in Pakistan.
Yes.
And there's the Trump administration is going to maybe get involved in terms of saving that medical doctor who helped us kill bin Laden.
Yeah.
Is that not so?
Yeah, this is an issue that has been really rubbing the wrong way for a long time. Certainly, I have some friends in the intelligence community, and they have been very upset about this. It essentially is the fact that we had a contractor, Dr. Shakil Afradi, who was working with the U.S. to do blood tests to confirm the bin Laden family was in the compound in Abbottabad. And that was a very important part. She didn't want to send a SEAL team in there and take out somebody that was the wrong person. They wanted to have fairly high certainty that this was the right guy. So Afradi helped us covertly to identify bin Laden and his family as being in that compound. Well, once we went in there and took out bin Laden, the Pakistanis, they were claiming, oh, this is a violation of our national sovereignty. And they arrested Afradi and charged him with treason. Now, after a few months, they sort of realized that treason is not a really good charge to call somebody when he's helping us catch bin Laden. So they created a trumped-up charge that he had been working with a terrorist warlord and also had been involved in some medical malpractice. And they reconvicted him under those charges and sentenced him to 33 years in jail.
Now, the Pakistanis,
these are our allies.
These
the
are our
Pakistanis,
allies.
Our so-called allies, yeah.
Now, when you worked there,
Yeah.
how did you interact with them? I mean,
Well, that's a very complicated subject, and it's like a lot of our foreign relations. We do have cooperation on certain matters, and we have lack of cooperation on other matters. But to focus on this with Dr. Afradi, he was thrown in jail, and he's been sitting in jail ever since the Bin Laden raid. President Trump said when he was on the campaign trail, if I get elected, Afradi will be out in 2 minutes. And essentially that's an exaggeration, but now, as of today, Wall Street Journal is reporting that the U.S. and Pakistan are discussing the possible release of Afradi. This man should be released. Dr. A.Q. Khan, who is the father of the Pakistan nuclear bomb, he is a national hero of Pakistan. He was involved in weapons smuggling and nuclear trafficking all over the world. He's a hero of Pakistan. And Dr. Afradi, who helped catch bin Laden, is in jail. That needs to be reversed.
You know, being a journalist, I cover Trump all the time. And I appreciate that he's trying to do this. There are the things...
Right.
I voted for Mr. Trump, but sometimes I look at how he acts and so forth. But it seems that in many cases he's doing on the issues. I agree with him on the issues. I don't sometimes agree on how he discusses the issues or his implementation of the issues, but I really agree with his issues. Is that you?
Well, I think that, you know, I mentioned this in our earliest gathering here, that we ought to be focusing on what needs to be done around the world and domestically.
This is Stanford Erickson. I'm in for Rhett Palmer. We'll come right back to these important questions.
Good. All right. Well, I'm glad we got that.
Signal.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Well, I have
there's
it
a
here.
clock here.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's that.
I'm glad we
I have
got
5 seconds left.
got that
I
in.
learned I just got to cut
in with the Friday.
Well, you
That's
do it very
good
well.
because the American public needs to know this stuff.
And your
okay?
passion showed.
Yeah,
Well,
that came
Well,
across.
it's
That's good.
no, it's nice.
That's an
I cover the State Department.
Yeah.
And 99% of them have no passion whatsoever. You think
Right.
that the blood was taken out by some vampire. You know,
Well,
it is so
this
great
is,
that you have
this is
passion.
such an outrageous situation.
But I love
there
that
are there are cases where diplomats do show rage or outrage.
Yeah.
Okay, you're not supposed to go over the top. I mean, you know, but we're in the Trump administration, so we have a new standard. We have a new benchmark.
Lack of standard.
We have a new benchmark on.
What do you want to talk about now?
I think I'd move on to like the regulatory relief, because that is underpinning the current expansion of the economy.
Now he's doing that with executive orders. Is
Right.
he going to go into the tax? You know, he has this tax program, but it appears when I read what he has, it's just another bandage, like George W. Bush did and Obama, and Reagan did. It's not really taking on what he said he was going to do. You know, let's reorder this.
That's particularly the argument of the right. Okay, is he's not doing enough on the taxes,
Yeah.
but he's stirring the pot.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's good, but I'll get to that.
Okay.
And then we'll
Yeah.
get back to this.
Yeah.
And Laura, jump in anytime you want, you know, because for two reasons. One, you always ask good questions, but also it's nice to have a feminine voice talking. Because I bet 60% of our audience are women.
I'm sure.
Is that right?
Yeah. Because the women are always the ones that say, well, I heard you the other day. You know, not many men say that to me. But maybe the women just want to talk to me, right?
Of course.
Of course. It's in my thought process.
But,
How are we doing for time?
We have a break.
No, I mean,
Oh, well,
we go back.
we have about, when we go back, we have about 3 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
and 3 minutes can seem very long.
No, I think we could talk about the economy for 3 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think people can relate.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're saying is fascinating. I mean, people don't realize what was involved in getting Obama. I mean,
Bin Laden.
Bin
Laden.
Bin Laden, yes. That Obama.
that's
You
about
have to be careful because there are
I
some
like
people that
Obama.
want to
Probably.
they want to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, the thing about the interest rate raising that I have concern with is the impact it's going to have on all of the interest rates paid by these third world countries and their inability to pay it. There's so much debt out there that's dollar denominated debt. And when we raise our interest rates, it's going to raise the value of the dollar. There's no question about that. High interest rate means high dollar. And the high dollar is going to make it very hard for these third world countries to pay back their dollar denominated debts.
It's going to be a fear of theirs, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's the good part of it, because they've borrowed far too much money. And how are you going to rein it in? You raise the interest rates, and then they're having to say, we're paying all this interest, we
But
can't
as
borrow
he
the
does,
money.
just interject on that.
Yeah,
That's
they may instead
no,
of
that's a good point because I
they may
never
end up
thought of that.
defaulting. That's the problem. You may have a lot of defaults by
You'll
third
have
world
some.
countries. Yeah.
And that's what Lagarde is afraid of.
But as he
Lagarde,
go-
that's the
as he-
IMF director.
Yeah, if he goes into
Okay,
that,
this is the last
interject.
spot, and
that's a good
we'll
point.
be back.
We can bring this up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, you do it and then he'll interject. That more fun when it's an
Okay.
interjection.
Well, maybe I'll start with the interest rates. I'll pick up on that.
Okay.
And then you can interject.
Stand by.
Shut that door.
Because I want to make a
Hey,
point on
it's Stanford Erickson again. We're here with some very intelligent, brilliant people, fun people. We were talking about the economy. Dr. Edminster, you were talking about interest rates and how that affects us and the world.
Thanks, Dan. I did want to talk about interest rates because the short-term interest rates are rising, and they're going to be bumped up another 0.25% in June. The Fed does these changes in 0.25% increments so that the economy and all of us who have to borrow money can adjust to it
Well, I sort of like that too because I'd like.
on your account.
Yes.
It's ridiculous,
The
isn't
bank
it?
makes more money investing your money while it's in the bank than you make because they're using your money.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
They use your money and then they invest it out. But the banks actually would like the interest rates to be a little bit higher, and they will make more money as it rises. Okay, but from an individual viewpoint, we have our money invested so that we can retire and we live off of our investments. We need a little more interest rates.
That's right.
That's where we're headed with the Fed's headed there. And as the Fed begins to shrink its balance sheet gradually, not dramatically, but gradually, by not reinvesting as the loans that it holds on its books are repaid. Okay, it just doesn't make new loans, it just lets those repayments come in and the balance sheet will shrink naturally.
Now, you're also mentioning off camera that regulatory reform is taking place as well, and that's going to help the economy.
It's going to be a big impact on the economy. Most of the new regulations came about because of administrative actions of the last administration. And so all this administration has to do is to ease off and redirect the regulations in a way that will bring the economy back again. And specifically what I have in mind in banking is emphasis on safety and soundness, emphasis on making loans to people who will repay those loans, and building a really solid underpinning for the next expansion of the
Well,
economy.
the community banks have suffered during this time as opposed to the national banks, right? I mean, and the community banks are the banks in our local cities. I mean, they know what people need more than the national banks.
Sure, because the community banks are locally owned, locally managed, and they know the community. But the big banks do a pretty good job of making loans to the small communities as well. So I wouldn't overemphasize that. But what's really crucial is to let the banks get to know their customers, make loans to them without a lot of red tape and a lot of justification and so forth, which costs money and which causes lower amounts to be lent, and people pay more for when they do borrow money.
The Trump administration is trying to get tax reform. I thought when President Trump was campaigning, I thought there would be this major emphasis on changing how we tax people. I know he's dealing now with the Congress that's not their major emphasis, right? I mean, what's going to happen in tax reform?
Oh, I know. I thought the Tea Party would call this a win, but the Tea Party's a little bit unhappy right now, and that's what we see going on in Washington, the politics with Trump. But what Trump is actually doing is stirring the pot. And he's a businessman. He's used to making deals. And the way you get to deals in a lot of cases is you throw out ideas. You say, hey, I want to do this. And people go, are you crazy? Well, yeah. I mean, you got to be a little bit crazy to do some of these things. So he's stirring the pot. And that's not all bad because then we can all get involved in the discussion of what the taxes ought to be.
The Heritage Foundation recently just fired their executive director, president, CEO, because he was really taking on Trump to some degree, to the point where the Heritage Foundation is now drawing back. Is
Who
that
is
mean
the Heritage Foundation?
Heritage Foundation is a major think tank, the number one largest think tank, tends to be a conservative think tank in Washington, but they also, in the last 5-6 years, they became advocates in terms of who gets elected. They've been spending money doing that. And the president who did that now got fired because the general feeling of those who are financing the Heritage Foundation is that he was aggressively taking on President Trump. And that's
Ed
abundance, I say.
Fulner?
No.
Oh.
No, that's a U.S. Senator, Southern Senator, I forget his name now. I apologize, but
Okay.
he used to be the United States Senator of South Carolina.
Okay.
Tea Party, aggressive individual, just got fired about a week and a half ago. And I would think, from my point of view, that means somebody is making up their mind, those that have the money, that perhaps we have to get behind Trump rather than undermine him from the far right point of view. Does that sound correct? Or
Well, it's always hard to say, when people get fired, and we're looking at Comey now, and that whole issue, why would he be fired? So now the Heritage Foundation's in that same situation. But the Heritage Foundation, from my years in Washington, was basically a brainiac trust.
yes,
People who are willing to dedicate their entire lives to a specific area of economics, okay, and policy issues. And it's really powerful to have that behind you because you have somebody that you can turn to and ask him questions like you asked Dave questions here.
yeah, another brainiac.
He's a
over there.
brainiac, what are we going to do with him?
Well, it's sort of a counterpart to the Brookings Institute, too. As I recall,
Yes.
the Brookings Institute was seen as a slightly left-wing but mainstream
Well, when I
think
first
tank.
started, it was really mainstream.
It was
And
mainstream.
it
It's
has
drifted
now-
a little bit.
It has now drifted to the left.
or the mainstream has drifted to the right.
or the mainstream, yes, whatever, yeah.
Well, the Heritage has grown dramatically, and so it's hired a lot of the conservative thinkers to the Heritage Foundation, and that left Brookings to be more a little bit on the left side, but not extreme left.
Yeah, and you also have on the same category as the Heritage is the Hoover Institute,
Yes.
which is part of Stanford,
Yes.
I think.
Now, you mentioned interest rates, David.
Yeah.
They bother you a little
Well,
bit, right?
the one thing about interest rates, the Fed wants to raise interest rates, but the consequences of that, one, obviously on housing prices, it's going to suppress housing. And you said the Fed had huge amount of housing debt obligations that it's trying to unload. It's going to be harder to unload if the interest rates are high and they can't get rid of those mortgages, I would think. And secondly, third world countries are going to have a real problem because they're holding dollar-denominated debt. And when the interest rates go up, the dollar will be stronger, and that will make it more expensive for them to continue to pay down that dollar debt.
And they're suffering.
They're going to
this
suffer
is
more.
poverty level.
Countries like Bangladesh and all of these African countries that are holding dollar-denominated debt, and a lot of that dollar-denominated debt has increased dramatically over the last few years.
We'll be back talking on this, and we also will get Laura Stewart in this. Laura Stewart wrote the book, What Would a Wise Woman Do? And we need wise women. We'll be back.
Define dollar-denominated debt.
Well, a dollar-denominated debt, if I'm a foreigner, I borrow, and let's say I'm using the Korean won, and I'm a company. I can go and borrow money from my local bank in won, or I can go and borrow money from Citibank, which is issued as dollars, and I have to pay it back in dollars. So my earnings, if I'm earning in my local country, I have to go and convert my local earnings into dollars and then pay back the debt.
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
The
that's a
reason
good
is more the financial markets. If you loan money in the financial markets, you're always concerned about risk. And one of the risks is currency risk.
Exchange rate risk,
The
right?
exchange rate, and that's what we're talking about, like the euro. So suppose 5 years ago you lent money in euros
Right.
when euros were trading for $1.30,
$1.50 or $1.30. Yeah.
$1.50,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden they're trading for $1.10.
Right.
You lost 30% of your money
If you're looking at it in dollar terms.
in
Okay.
dollar terms.
In dollar terms, yeah.
Okay.
So that's why.
So the strong currency is the dollar, and it's referred to as a reserve currency.
We have Steve Olds coming in. and-
So
Because
big
it's
deals
been
are done in dollars.
consistent compared to other countries' currencies? Is that why it's considered a
it's-
strong currency?
Well, it's
No, I
almost.
just wanted to tell you, I have
The
to
U.S. has
be
become the international
Rhett has
reserve
an
currency,
electrician coming
meaning
to the
that
house and I'm
every
not
other
saying-
currency is measured against that. In fact, oddly enough, when you talk about the price of oil, we talk about the price of oil going up and down relative to dollars. But if you're in another country, the price of oil the oil barrel price is tied to the dollar. And so if the dollar goes up, that means the price of oil goes up. Okay? In a foreign country. So you've got inflation just by the fact that the dollar has gone up.
Let's get into all that. Let's get into that. That'd be useful. But
And that was all with one question. Define something for me.
yeah, I'm going to get back to let's go.
Why don't we
back-
do South Korea elections?
Yeah,
South
let's
Korea
go,
elections.
That's what I was going to say. South Korea election, how this is going to affect,
Okay.
and get back into the economy.
Okay, because that just happened last week too, the South Korean election.
So it's a socialist that got elected, is
yeah,
that right?
yeah.
Is this a populist?
No, not a
No?
populist, a socialist. Very, I would put him to the left of Obama, by far.
Like Bernie Sanders, you mean?
It's hard to judge, but somebody that wants to go up and have powwows with the North Koreans.
Yeah, that sounds like Obama.
I'll bring this up. My
Yeah.
first wife was Korean, and
Right.
her family was the George Washington of Korea.
One of the questions I would like to ask him,
Yeah.
okay, and that is, what does it take to stop North Koreans' nuclear threat? What is it going to take for them to not build nuclear weapons?
Okay. Let's hold
all right.
that. Ask
You
that
see what I
question.
mean? Being
go ahead.
nice may not do it.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
No. That's good question.
You know, I'm concerned about the building boom. I really am. I have a feeling a lot of people are getting second homes, and pretty soon the money problem will cause them not to be able to pay off this mortgage.
Yeah, we've gone through that once before.
Well, it depends
and
on
really
what.
the solution to that is you raise interest rates. Okay. You know why that's the solution? Because then you have to, at the end of the month, you're paying your bills and you go, wow, all of a sudden I'm paying $1,600 a month in interest. And a few years ago I was only paying $1,200. Okay, I can't afford this.
Well, they better lock in their fixed interest rate loans for the mortgages. That's for sure. Don't take a variable rate mortgage.
But many people didn't. And what happened when the rate?
Yeah, that's
interest
what
rate
happened the
went up?
last time. Yeah, the last.
Right. It happens every time.
Yeah.
And you can tell people they ought to do fixed rate, but they go, well, yeah, but my monthly interest is going to go up if I do fixed rate. They won't think beyond the current time period.
I used to be in real estate. You're so right.
Okay. So, what do you do in a free market where people have choice? Do you take the choice away from them and say you have to have a fixed rate loan? No, you wouldn't do that, would you? And you know that in real estate.
Hmm.
And you shake your head and you go,
Right.
why are they doing
Okay,
this?
when we come back, we have about 12 minutes that we can talk, so we have good time.
Okay, good.
And Laura, jump in anytime. Okay.
Oh, we have 12 minutes for the next
Right
session?
after the next section. Yes.
Oh my
Great.
gosh.
Yeah, it's a good session.
And I'll be leaving you at 10:30, but you're doing a great job. This is an interesting,
Yeah.
really interesting show.
Oh yeah. Well, the
Good.
key is having bright people.
Yeah.
The worst thing.
Yeah.
I have a couple of people that are absolutely brilliant, but they talk and then they're quiet. Oh, you can't talk and be quiet. You got to keep talking. Let me
Right.
interrupt you, please. Let me interrupt you. Just keep talking. Laura knows this. She does this all the time. But you want people to keep
They
talking.
just-
Dead space. You don't have dead space in radio.
Right. We need to invite more New
It's a
Yorkers.
radio show. It's a radio show.
It's a
right?
radio show. You got to
You
keep
don't want people changing the volume because they think it's gone.
You don't need this, do you?
No,
Okay.
I love you. See you later.
Bye, Beverly.
Bye, Beverly.
Bye-bye. Great show.
But that's why Rhett likes me, because I just keep talking, you know.
Even when the show's off.
Even when the show's off.
You just love to talk, I know.
But
Well,
that's- he
a lot of
just-
intellectual people have a lot on their minds, is what it amounts to. They know a lot, and so,
Like, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah. right.
Okay, we're going to go to the
To
election
the
itself.
elections, right, okay,
Yeah.
good. And Bob, your question was quite good about what can we do to stop the North
Yeah,
Korean
just
missile program.
interject it then.
Yeah,
I will.
because,
Yeah.
because,
Because it's better when it's an exchange.
Yeah.
Just everybody talking. you
right,
know.
I've been watching MASH reruns,
I have too.
and I'm like, nothing's changed.
In fact, I've got a suspicion about all these MASH reruns being shown in the last year, that there are people that are thinking that we need to be conditioned to be prepared for Korea War Phase 2.
Two. Oh my
People,
God.
Yeah.
you know, people.
That's horrible.
No, there are people that do that, and
Yeah.
that's what people don't understand. That there's some puppeteers up there that like doing that. I love David Rockefeller because he's one of the puppeteers, and but he was a well-intentioned puppeteer from my point of view. So
Right.
very well-intentioned.
He wasn't a great banker.
Well, he was a PhD economist.
No, I know, but people say that he really is.
No, Reed was much better.
Yeah, Rockefeller tore apart
That's right.
Citibank at the
It
time.
wasn't. It's
Yeah.
boredom.
Yeah.
He's a
He's not
PhD.
exactly annoyed when you get a PhD. You know?
I mean, he was a thinker, and
Yeah.
he was a internationalist,
Right.
And,
Yeah,
he
an
wanted to-
internationalist,
He
yeah.
wanted to do good. He really, I liked him because he wanted to do good, but he would pontificate, and I see journalists roll their eyes.
No, that's a PhD.
But he's a well-intentioned individual. He just died too. I wish I had been around him in those, because I would like to really have interviewed him, to a major story on him, because he helped so much.
Stand by, here we go.
Sorry, it's not Rhett. It's Stanford Erickson. Rhett, I'm sitting in for him. He's on assignment right now. We're talking about all these major current events that are happening. But right now, last week we had an election in South Korea. David Hunter, who's a State Department diplomat. What comes of this election? How does this affect us especially?
Well, we talked earlier in the program about the North Korea conflict and the risks now with the accelerating weapons development and nuclear capacity of North Korea. She was
Her
in
father-
Mrs. Park, who was on the very conservative side and very strong ally of America. She was impeached for corruption. And this new president, Moon Jae-in, was elected. Now, Moon is a protege of the former president Roh Moon-hyun, and Roh Moon-hyun had a policy when he was in power in about 2007, 2008, of what's called the Sunshine Policy. And the Sunshine Policy was opening up trade and diplomatic relations and people-to-people exchanges with North Korea. In fact, in 2007, Mr. Moon helped the President Roh to organize a summit between North and South Korea at the time that the so-called six-party talks were being held. And so there was a lot of interest in helping bridge the gap and bring about a peaceful unification of North and South Korea.
They gave a lot of food.
They gave over $4 billion of aid during that sunshine period to the North Koreans. And they also had this Kaesong Industrial Park, which was one of the major joint
It's
projects.
right on the 38 parallel.
Yeah, and
right?
it was a joint project of the North and South Koreans where they had companies working together.
And that still exists today?
No, it was closed down. But Moon, who's now elected, one of his proposals is to reopen Kaesong and to start what's called Sunshine 2, which would be a restarting of this exchange program in tourism and people-to-people exchange between North and South Korea. Now, that sounds great if he can get Kim Jong-un to do it. But Kim Jong-un, going on between North and South Korea, if
The North Korea.
he was handling this diplomacy with North Korea, and he said, we will be fundamentally disappointed if we believe China will put much pressure on North Korea that they will cease and desist from developing nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. I mentioned in the earlier section that China was actually supplying some military missile-related technology to the North Koreans. Dong, which is in the
What's the role of diplomacy in getting the Chinese
Well,
to throw the Korean cyber thieves out?
the question of Chinese department sanctioning a Korean, a Chinese woman who is a member of the Chinese national fellow clan members. They are basically the same tribe, ethnically, racially. The North and South Koreans are one tribe. So we're asking them to go to war in order to protect us from long-range missiles.
The problem from the Korean point of view, and I've lived in Korea in the service. I also married a Korean woman, and the family of, so that if
People
it's just,
are conducting.
And
But
he
one
does not
company in
have,
Spain,
actually the State
if they
Department even,
cleared
Rex
that threat
Tillerson,
immediately,
they did not
paid
staff
it,
up
it was
the State
over
Department. They don't have their
$500,000.
deputies
They actually paid it?
undersecretaries and all these
They're
people
still trying to
help
figure out how to get past it.
Because the
solidify
argument is
the
don't
senior
pay
management
because
structure.
you send
So
money
it's
by
running
Bitcoin,
on autopilot.
and then they don't do anything.
let's go.
Right. Well, some of it, there's an immediate decryption that happens. The thing with this new WannaCry is it seems to be a manual process to decrypt, and they weren't expecting it to blossom as big as it was.
Okay.
So nobody has the ability to get the decryption to them.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So that makes it even
Let's
harder.
hold that for the thing. We have, after we break, we have about 3-4 minutes, and we'll talk on cyber, and then we'll come back and go to Saudi Arabia, okay? And Lord, interject.
And a lot of companies don't have the proper backups and safeguards to not pay it because
Right.
they can't get their data, so their
Right.
businesses are just gone.
Right.
So they have to try. And by the way, it can take up to a week to create a Bitcoin account.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
So they can't
Or
even
more.
pay it if they want to.
Right.
Now, the other question about Bitcoin is not controlled by the Federal Reserve.
And there's no way to trace.
Yeah, but the issue is if you move to Bitcoins, it could substitute for currencies that are
2
outside
more
of central
spots.
banking.
Then to rejoin.
Outside of
Stand
central
by.
banking domain. That's why they're really concerned about it.
It's crazy. And then the fact that it was created by the NSA, I get why they do it.
Bitcoin?
No, the,
Oh.
the
The
WannaCry.
cyber-
The
The
WannaCry.
WannaCry was committed
Oh.
by our own government. We're paying
Yeah.
for this.
But they have to prevent other people from doing it, right? There's how do you balance it? Just because we can, should we? But you've got North Korea that doesn't seem to use any humanity.
You are listening to the mayor of the airwaves.
Hey, it's Stanford Erickson sitting for Rhett Palmer. We had a cyber attack just a few days ago. Bob, how does this affect you, and what do you think about this?
I think this affects all of us. Hundreds of millions of U.S. citizens are impacted by, if nothing else, the fear of a cyber attack on their computer. And their whole life is disrupted. It's sort of like somebody hitting you in the arm a little bit, as you walk along. They just touch you.
And according to reports, it's the North Koreans that are doing this.
Yep. And I think Dave's talked about this a little bit. Dave, where are the North Koreans actually doing the cyber attacks from?
Well, the reported evidence is that the Unit 121 is based in Dandong, China, which is outside of North Korean territory. And that's because the Chinese have a much better capacity to do linking and so forth.
Yeah, they have
and
the
they've got,
internet connections to do it.
And they've got several hundred people that are operating out of that unit. And they're essentially a cyber warfare division. Now, I don't know whether there also are some illusions and suspicions that it's possible Chinese are doing some of these cyber attacks and blaming it on the North Koreans.
And
So,
you know, I'll tell you what, this is going to get to civil liberties really fast, because we can't go to the Chinese and get them to shut this down, so we're going to have to shut it down at the border. So we're going to have a cyber border, or a cyber wall, if you will. And in other words, we're going to be, as soon as you do that, you go, oh my gosh, now we're insulating the U.S. Citizens from the rest of the world. And who's going to control that entry point to the U.S., in and out?
Well, Laura Stewart, you're an expert in this type of technology. Can there be a cyber wall?
You know, it goes into that whole net neutrality and that whole conversation about, can you prevent certain information from being passed on the internet? We see this with Google now, where you put in something that you're looking for and Google responds. But what we're learning is that Google, Yahoo, all of the search engines, Bing, they're all filtering the data you're getting as well. It's not just everything that comes up. They're filtering what you're seeing at the top. So in some ways, we're already having some forms of walls. How do you allow people to have that freedom to look up what they want to look up? When I was a kid, we went to the library. We used Encyclopedia Britannica. I looked at microfiche copies of old newspapers, and I had to search that way. But now you can search whatever you need, so that knowledge that is out there is amazing. If we begin to put walls in place, now it's going to start making it so people can't find the information they need. Now we're becoming a totalitarian world where somebody up there is deciding what information you're going to get. Do we want to become it?
That's already existing.
Right, but if you go to the next level.
One of the principals who's really good at this is Apple, because they put borders up. They don't take any software that comes along. They look at the software, make sure it's safe for us to use, right?
Right, but that's very different than putting a wall up and saying we're not going to accept any information coming from that area. Apple, by not going open source with their software, putting their code out there that people can see what's going on, they make it harder for hackers to get in. But kind of thing, Android, where people are creating an app and then it watches everything you do, and now it has access to your financial data, your healthcare data, because it's tracked your passwords. You know, WannaCry was so crazy how it hit because there was a fix for it. Mm-hmm. But most people don't do the basic precautions. It's like locking your front door. You have to take some responsibility for your own internet safety.
But what we're seeing is that we're having private sector businesses develop those locks. Windows is going to have a new system coming out with a platform that they've announced for this month with their new laptop. And it's going to operate, it's going to be Windows 10-S. And the only software in Windows 10-S is that software that's been approved by Microsoft. So we're already seeing people come in and lock it down because we are so afraid of having our privacy invaded, of having our computer shut down by some third party we don't know, that we're willing to put a lock on the door.
Well, let me just mention, we talked about North Korea as a potential threat, and there are other countries out there that, as nation states, are beefing up their cyber warfare capabilities. North Korea, 50% of the graduates of university from North Korea graduate in engineering or science or physics or math, as opposed to 4% in the United States. Now, what it says is they realize that this is a what you call an asymmetric vulnerability. First of all, North Korea has very little computer systems inside its country, so it can't be attacked. And yet it can attack us.
At
and
will.
And at will. And we have a lot of vulnerable systems. Our power plant systems, our hospitals, all of these things, even if they're being upgraded, they're not upgraded quickly enough. And as these people are putting massive state-backed power into cracking our security systems in order to they've actually accessed the Pentagon repeatedly. So we're in a real unbalanced situation here, and we don't have the U.S. government and the U.S. population have not strengthened and fortified their security systems against these cyber attacks.
Well, that's what we need to do. We need to have the government on our side.
Yeah.
Well, recently, President Trump met with two Soviet diplomats, and he was sort of trying to help them in terms of giving them the insight in terms of potential risks. And he's being criticized as being leaking information. Now, I hate these headlines, leaking. He gave information. He didn't leak information. Leaking information is what the journalists say it is. He gave them information, hopefully trying to say, look, we're working together in trying to deal with terrorists, right? So it's very, very difficult. This is a very complex world, and sometimes the journalists make it who against me against you. But we'll come back on this. This is Stanford Erickson. I'm in for Rhett Palmer. We'll be right back. Okay, we'll go to the Saudi.
Yeah, and that's a very good point you made about leaking versus not. I mean, when I heard that, I'm thinking the president does not leak information when he passes it to somebody.
The headline, the press journal says leaking.
Yeah.
The headline, leaking.
And the Times almost says the same thing.
Right, and it's first of all, it's not a leak. The only.
How are you, Tom?
I'm auditing.
Yeah.
You're auditing?
Well, Tom used to do this for the military. He used to be a radio announcer.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
During Desert Storm, I was a public affairs chief at the Pentagon.
Oh, were you? Okay.
During all the briefings during that.
Great.
Okay.
And he worked in the Pentagon. He's auditing, but he's taking notes on us, which goes to
That was an interesting subject. My wife kicked me out of the house. She was vacuuming. Let's get out of there. Go for a ride.
So the Saudis are thinking about selling their oil company.
Yes.
Aramco.
They're prepping it.
Well, they're making it public.
5%
They
of
want to
it.
go an IPO.
5%. 5%.
Just 5%.
Well, that's where you start.
Yeah.
And that way you develop a market price.
Right.
And then you can sell the rest over time, which is what
Right.
General Electric's
Yeah.
been doing.
Right. The sale of Aramco is partly because they're desperate for currency. They believe it or not, the Saudis have enormous obligations, financial obligations around the world, and including U.S. arms purchases.
Sure.
And
Well, we're not going to give them the stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, they don't give us the oil. We don't give them the arms.
Okay, after this, we have about 12 minutes again, so we can get into this,
okay,
and then everything's short again. So we have another good 12 minutes where we can really talk of
Yeah,
substance,
yeah.
and then the rest. And I might end with a poem I wrote.
okay.
For Mother's Day. A Mother's Day poem.
It's a long poem.
But that's what Rhett always says. Oh, my poems are long.
Yeah. But that was absolutely right. The press is misrepresenting Trump's ability to handle this classified information. And to be honest, depending on his briefing, I've never been in a presidential briefing with the CIA, but did they give in his briefing information that this is third-party sourced from a third-party intelligence source, and therefore that cannot be shared outside? That's
we
a
don't
question.
know, and,
if he was given written briefing, it probably was. If he
Lieutenant-
was giving an oral briefing, they may not have briefed him.
Lieutenant General Masters was in there.
Yeah.
And if it was, he should have interrupted.
Well, would he have cared?
No, he would have cared.
That's my concern with
No, he
Trump.
would have
Would
cared.
he
No,
cared?
see, this is the problem.
He does
If
care.
you're being given information and it does not say it's from a third party, code word source, then when you talk about it and then they say, "Oh, you revealed third party code word sourced material," that's wrong because Trump was never told in the first place that it was that kind of level of classification.
He probably isn't even aware of it.
He wasn't aware of it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So then ironically, the worst part of this that's not being discussed is that somebody from CIA or NSA leaked that out to the
That's-
public,
that's
to the Washington Post.
That's the
That's
well, David Ignatius. His father was CIA.
Yeah.
David Ignatius.
oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
his
Ignatius
father-
is
David Ignatius.
he ought to be CIA. He's been there.
Well,
so
okay,
long.
yes.
If he did say something wrong and McMaster's heard it, he would have to, within the
McMaster?
meeting, so gracefully
Yes.
undo that.
Well,
so the
hopefully,
Russians didn't
hopefully
even
you
know.
would that. Hopefully you would do that. But
and,
taking on
and that would be hard to do because Trump
Interrupting-
doesn't let you get into the
yeah,
conversation.
interrupting Trump might be difficult.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I had a
He's a control freak.
No, I had a CEO that wanted me to do that. And another CEO, when I did that, because I was in PR, he took me on after, don't ever do that. And I said that my job is to do that. Trust me, because I know what's going to be in the paper. And it dawned on him. He says, "Oh." So then after that, he let me do it. I said, "I know what's going to be in the paper. So I'm just trying to protect you from you're saying that because I don't want the headline on that."
Which
And-
newspaper do you like to read the most? Wall Street Journal, or
Well,
you
I
just
generally prefer the Wall Street Journal. It's forget about the Press Journal. You can't get any news
Right,
out of
that's
that.
local stuff.
Yeah, and
That's where you find out what milk is on sale. Or milk is on sale.
and you
It's a
know,
local newspaper. You
for,
expect local
for you know
issues.
the New York Times does good international coverage, and I mostly read international coverage anyway. I'm not real keen.
gee, I
on
wonder
it.
why.
Yeah, right.
So,
I've just been trying to figure out which papers I should
yeah,
be
I think-
reading
I
because I
think-
want to get more
I-
educated.
I read Time Magazine, which is very insightful. It has a lot of good international coverage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's balanced and in depth. And the Wall Street Journal, editorials, they're a bit turning a little foxy on me. And
Well, they don't like Trump.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
been against Trump the whole
Yeah.
time. I read them all.
What do you think about the
USA
Washington
Today,
Post?
Wa-
I mean,
Washington
Washington Post is
I have to stop reading it. It just drives me
respected
nuts.
paper, but when you get into domestic politics, every journalist now has become biased. It's not that you can't find anybody who's fair and impartial because journalism has become so politicized.
Yes.
So,
2 more spots in the open, so stand by.
I subscribe to the Washington Post alerts because
Yeah.
for a year you got it free with you got a free subscription
What does he mean,
with
the open?
Press Journal.
right.
How much? What?
I used
You
to
said
read
the
New York
open?
Times
Yeah,
when I
he's
lived in New
just
What's
York.
that mean?
It means
Well, the New York
they're going to
Times,
introduce us.
Oh,
they go
The
into
opening
enormous
just-
detail.
This is Rhett Palmer.
So
He does
Oh, I
all
see.
the
Okay,
things like
okay.
that.
It's almost too much
Bob,
information.
we're going to go to the.
Dave.
Saudi.
David, we're going to go to the. Yeah, we're going to go to the going to Saudi, and then if everybody interject in terms of
Right.
how the president is dealing with all within a short period of time. He's met more heads of government than any other president
Right.
within 125 days.
Mm-hmm.
And when the head of a snake goes like this, the tail goes like this. So
Yeah.
in terms of management, that's not the best management
Right.
structure, in my opinion.
Well, Trump's tweeting. That's one of the things somebody said that they ought to, the chief of staff ought to take away his tweet.
Here we go, stand by.
Hi, it's Stanford Erickson. I'm sitting in for Rhett Palmer and David Hunter. The President Trump is going on his first international trip. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that Saudi Arabia and Israel is out in the desert, and the nearest analogy I would say is Trump is headed for quicksand.
Wow.
And the point is that these countries are extremely complicated. They have extremely complicated relations with each other. They have extremely complicated relations with Iran, and
themselves.
and-
Like,
and
Israel
them-
is complicated in itself.
in itself. And Trump is wading into really difficult conditions. And I don't know if he's ready for it. I don't think that the State Department has been staffed up adequately. As I mentioned during the break, they have not appointed undersecretaries and assistant secretaries. And so you basically have a lot of this being run on autopilot, or as the Wall Street Journal suggested about Trump's visit, the Saudi arrangements are being done through his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, with the deputy.
He's 37 years old.
With the
son-in-law,
deputy, with the deputy,
with no background to some degree in international affairs.
right. But with the deputy crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, that's the son of King Salman, who is about 36 years old, who's the defense minister of Saudi Arabia. You wonder how experienced he is to be defense minister at 36. What is, of course, going on is a traditional mating ritual between Saudi Arabia and the United States, which is called defense contracts. The Saudis have bought in 2015. They signed an order for the largest U.S. defense contract in history, and that was for about $80 billion, including a lot of F-15s and upgrading of 70 older F-15s. It was a huge contract. And now, part of the announced plan for the visit is that there's going to be another big defense contract. That's what the Wall Street Journal has been reporting, that there's likely to be.
But how are they going to pay for this,
Well,
Ed?
Well, they're going to have to pay. They're going to pump a lot of oil and sell it, and that's how they're going to pay for all of this. So
Right.
it's basically we run our cars on their oil, and we pay for all of that, and then they buy the defense weapons. But keep in mind that the Saudis have borders with major conflicts on the other side of those borders. In fact, they're building a huge wall between themselves and their neighbors. So there's a lot of cost from that. So they're fighting wars today that we barely hear about.
Right. Well, what I wanted to mention is that the defense purchases of Saudi Arabia are probably not necessary for Saudi Arabia's defense. What they are essentially is to buy influence with the U.S. And that's how they are able to get Trump to come over there, is by essentially using this huge contracting, getting our defense industry interested in this in order to help influence. So Saudi Arabia is using this as a form of political influence. Not that they need all of these F-16s and F-15s, and I wouldn't be surprised if they come up with a discussion about F-35 fighters for Saudi Arabia. Now, why does Saudi Arabia need stealth fighters? That's an interesting question.
Do they potentially want to sell it to somebody else?
Well, the U.S. is preparing to. I'm not going to get into that, and I don't know enough about it. But yes, the U.S. defense contractors would be glad to have more orders for the F-35 because it's a extremely expensive airplane, and you can lower the costs if you can sell more of them.
But isn't Israel and Saudi are probably, because of the terrorist problem in Syria, are closer than they've been ever? Is that so?
You're right, and it's not the terrorist problem, to be honest. My analysis is that what is drawing Saudi Arabia and Israel close together is their mutual hatred of Iran. And now the interesting point is that Saudi Arabia hates Iran because Iran is a Shia. It's the capital of Shiism. And Saudi Arabia has its own version of Sunnism, which is the competing variety of Islam, called Wahhabism. Now, Wahhabism is an extremely fundamentalist and hostile form of Islam, and they are broadcasting it and propagating it all over the world. They have spent hundreds of billions of dollars over the past 20 years in propagating Wahhabism all over the world, including where I served in Pakistan. They spent $100 million a year in Pakistan. Most of the Islamic extremists that are currently fighting us, like ISIS and Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda, they are all based in the Wahhabi Salafi ideology. That's their basic version of Islam that they adopt, which is totally intolerant to any deviations. Now, our ally, Saudi Arabia, by the way, is talking about intolerance. It is ranked by the Freedom House, which is a major rater of human rights and democracy. It is rated as the worst of the worst. King Solomon, when he was appointed in just last year, I think, to the end of 2015, he has executed more people, including by beheading, in his brief period of reign than any other Saudi king. you're talking about 60 people in 1 month, and over 150 people in a year were beheaded.
And these were not just people trying to undermine the government. These were people that had relations with their neighbor.
Well, a lot of these people, in fact, quite a few of them. There's one called that was a Shia sheikh. Keep in mind, Saudi Arabia has 15% of its population are Shia. So even though it's a Sunni state, they have a lot of Shia living in the eastern provinces. And that's where the oil is, in the eastern provinces. So there's a concern on the part of the Saudis that these Shia inside are a fifth column of Iran that's being used to try to destabilize the Saudis. So anyway, you have a very flashing conflict between Sunni and Shia in Saudi Arabia and with Iran. And Trump is walking into the middle of that. And Saudi Arabia is at the moment trying to form a Arab NATO under this young prince, the Minister of Defense, Mohammed bin Salman. He's proposed since last year creating an alliance of Arab countries in a military alliance. And I would not be surprised to see Trump also being sold a bill of goods there to support and endorse that so-called alliance, which is essentially an alliance to fight Iran. It's not an alliance to go after ISIS.
But before you jump to conclusions on that, I think it's important to recognize that Trump is getting out to everybody in the world, all the world leaders, okay?
Yeah.
Except North Korea, of course.
Right.
But he's getting out to people that can be our friends and have been our friends and certainly our allies. And I think he should be commended for that, okay? There are fears, of course, when you leave home and you go out and you meet other people. You may be taken advantage of, but at least you're out there and you're working on some kind of détente that will help the United States.
You like my concern about that, Bob, is that when the head of the snake moves a little bit, the tail of the snake moves a lot. And Trump, in this 125 days, 130 days, in meeting probably more heads of state in the world than any other president of the United States. David, does he have the briefing? Does he have the background? You know, I'm a journalist 40 years. It took me a long time to even understand how the State Department works.
Right.
Like 10 years as a journalist,
Yeah.
I finally began to understand the State Department.
Right.
Does the State Department support that? I mean,
Well,
they
this is
brief
where-
him, they say, here's what you need to say, and here's what you don't
See,
need to say.
this is why I mentioned this. If this summit meeting is being set up by Jared Kushner and not the State Department, then you have all of these leftover entanglements that are being ignored because Jared Kushner is only looking at this one little personal relationship that he has with the deputy crown prince. And of course the lure, the bait that the Saudis always use is a bribe of the defense contract. So this is not a getting out and meeting your neighbors. This is a conscious effort by foreign countries to steer and direct and manipulate the United States foreign policy.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. But, Trump has stood up to a lot. We've seen that during the last election.
Right.
Remember, people say he didn't have a chance of winning.
I've stood up to Rhett Palmer, but he'll be back. This is Stanford Erickson, and we'll be back too. Bye.
Okay.
We just have a few minutes after that.
All right.
Laura, anything you want to interject?
Yeah,
In the few minutes that we're coming back.
The question that comes up for me and has throughout the Trump presidency and even before that is the way we've been doing things doesn't seem to be working enough.
In the past.
In the past.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily agreeing that the way things are going in the current presidency is there, but maybe some sort of shakeup needs to happen. I'm talking the thought out.
If Laura, if you just do that, and then you two, and then we only have a few minutes,
right?
About 4 minutes, and we have to go.
Right. Brought up some stuff that wasn't on my radar.
Good.
At all.
Good.
No. He's.
Yeah, because in businesses sometimes you have to go outside the box because the way that things have been always done isn't always because of what's happening on the external factors the way it needs to happen in the future. But there's, like you said, those pieces, those agreements, but maybe they need to be broken. I don't know.
Well, I think the
That's for wiser heads than mine.
Right.
I hope
But
wiser heads.
just because Jared is organizing this, quote, organizing and
Right.
making that bridge,
That's what
right?
the press
That-
reported.
Yeah, well, but that doesn't mean that this huge thousands of people like you, right, who are in there, aren't having their say, right? And like the Heritage Foundation's got to be involved in this too, because they have some experts on this, and maybe the Hoover Foundation and other experts will be brought in
Right.
to support it all.
But
But that's not going to make headline news. It's not going to be reported
I
on the
know,
news.
but will Trump take the time to listen to all these people? That's what
Yeah.
you have to
It-
say.
it-
He has to take the
He
time.
doesn't
Well,
have
that's
a
his
record
job,
of being
is to
taken
figure out-
advantage
Right.
either.
Yeah.
You know,
You know,
he pulls out of everything.
When I was just getting started in diplomatic service and learning about Asia and how to deal with Asians, you know, you have the example of when someone hands you a card, and everyone hands you a card, and you're supposed to take the card and look at it respectfully, even if you can't read it, and sort of make an effort to acknowledge them. It's an aspect
Right.
of business. A lot of Americans, they will take the card and stuff it in their pocket.
Oh, yeah.
And that's considered a sign of disrespect.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Okay,
also,
but Americans don't know that.
also, there's another thing. If you lift your foot
Right. In Arab countries.
in Arab countries, it's an
Yeah.
insult. Now,
A
someone has
horrible
to-
insult.
Yes, someone has to tell Trump, don't lift your foot like that. You keep your foot down.
Right.
Where would you put your foot up?
You
Put it on the desk.
but you don't. You
Cross
Trump,
your leg a certain way and
You cross
show
your leg a
the-
certain
Trump
way.
has
the sole
actually
of
been
your foot.
photographed
Oh, I
in
see.
the Oval Office with his feet on the desk.
Yes,
With his feet up on the desk.
Well, sure. That's what I used to do.
but I know, but that's an insult.
Photograph.
That's an insult.
yeah.
You know, it's like
But yet
throwing
at
the
the
shoe. Shoot, remember, you throw your shoe. That's an insult.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
But yet at the same
Well,
time,
Try
you
going
know,
to Turkey and doing this to
Oh
somebody.
yeah, I know. Well, Italy, they do the same thing.
well, but look at the world leaders, Germany and Chancellor of Germany.
Last spot.
She did not
Rejoin
wear
us next.
Okay,
when
we're
she
gonna-
went
we're gonna-
to
Laura,
the
I'm
country.
gonna go to you.
Okay. But she didn't wear
A burqa.
the burqa.
Right.
You know, that's the culture there. But she said, sorry, you know. They're still in commercial.
Hey, it's Stanford Erickson, and Laura Stewart's been quiet here as she's listening to these two sort of intellectual giants as I listen to them. And your thoughts, Laura?
You know, I've been sitting here thinking about the best way to phrase the question or what's really been coming up for me. And David, you were just talking about, you know, Jared going in and he's sort of changing the way and this Department of State's not fully staffed. But, you know, in business, sometimes you have to don't do things the way it's always been done because they may not be working anymore because the world is changing so rapidly that the way things were done in the past no longer work the most effectively. Is that some of what we're seeing? I don't know. I mean, Trump's style is nothing like anything we've ever seen before, but does some of this shakeup, this have to happen in order for change to go forward?
I think that I want to congratulate Trump on some of these things, like the Afradi going after that. He realizes that that's an issue, and maybe realizing that some of these countries have been taking advantage of us for many years or have been lying to us, and we need to reappraise some of our alliances based on that. I frankly think it's time to dust off the alliance list and start reviewing them critically. Even with Saudi Arabia, this king of Saudi Arabia, King Salman, is not a reformer. He is somebody who is actually been tied to supporting radical Islam for much of his career when he was governor of Riyadh. And that's a record that has been written about as recently as 2015. We need to have some changes. But what you mentioned, the State Department and so forth, being maybe needing to shake up, what you're talking about is, you know, the State Department is like an airplane. You don't take off with a half a tank of gas, and you don't take off with no wheels where you can't land again. So what you've got to do is certain aspects of our diplomacy are de rigueur. They can't change. They're protocol. They have to be done in a certain way, and that is what I'm concerned about with some of these impromptu changes that Kushner might be making. That he's not looking at the side effects, and we can easily be manipulated, as we have been in the past, by their influencing K Street lobbyists who then come in and start through the side doors and start pressuring us. And so we need to be able to represent the American interests and not the interests of our foreign adversaries coming through K Street.
But do some of the protocols actually need to change? I mean, let's talk about German Chancellor going in to an Islamic country and not wearing a burqa because she said, this is wrong. It's subjugating women. I'm a woman. Why would I propagate that?
Right.
How do we determine which protocols really don't make sense anymore? Who's doing that, and when does it need to happen?
Right. Well, you and my wife are on the same page about this whole burqa thing. She thinks it's ridiculous that the American women are required to wear a burqa when they go over there, and yet when they come over here, they insist that they should be wearing burqas. The women, the Muslim women. You can't. If you're going to conform to the rules of the country in the country, then when you're out of the country, you should not insist on carrying those cultural behaviors to the other country.
Bob, you've interacted with people from other nations and especially business people. And what I've found covering international trade is the people at that level are the elite. I mean, these are people that have been groomed generations. And these are very talented people. And we in the United States, Hemingway once said that we are the most innocent and naive people in the world. And to some degree, we haven't had generations of diplomats. We haven't had generations of generals. We're a young nation. Isn't that sort of a problem? I mean, Trump's going in here, and he's 3 generations from being in Scotland, and so he's not groomed for some of these interactions.
He's not groomed for the diplomatic interactions, but he's well groomed for business interactions. And I think the hallmark of his presidency is going to be putting the United States on some business foundations and be making good deals around the world. That's what he's going to try to do. Is he going to do it perfectly? No, I don't think any of us would say that. But he's going to go in and look at those contracts and see, is the United States being taken advantage of where our, quote, political interests dominated our business sense? Mm-hmm. So he's going to try to balance politics and business a little bit. And I think that's worth pursuing, frankly.
Yeah, I think a good example of that business sense was this what's called unfair burden sharing in NATO. I don't think Trump is against NATO. I think Trump wants NATO to be more of a balanced burden sharing, and he's noted for years that the other NATO members have not paid their ponied up 2%, and they essentially have been getting a free ride on the back of the United States.
I think Germany's a good example of that. We're a long way from World War II,
right?
If you didn't notice.
Yeah.
And so Germany can rebuild its military and be a partner. It's doing a fantastically great job, I think, with France and partnering with them on a friendly basis. The world's changed, and I think that's what Laura's getting to. We need to change how we deal with these old issues and make it a new world.
Right.
But I'll tell you what, I think what Trump is doing as well domestically is really important in terms of regulatory relief. We need some hometown changes here, bring some sense back into how we restrict business, how much burden we put on businesses. A wide range of burdens have been put on businesses in the last 15 to 20 years. And it's time to kind of revisit all of that and come up with a reasonable level.
I agree with that. My concern with, and I voted for President Trump, but my concern with President Trump from a management point of view is that he's taking on a lot of powerful interests, including our intelligence department and the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned us against. And these are people that leak things to the Washington Post. I mean, as David, you pointed out, how did they know that Trump said something in the Oval Office to two Russians that was leaked to the? I mean, this is a cyber-free area. So someone in the intelligence industry had to know this and leak it to probably David Ignatius of the Washington Post. Now, David Ignatius is a brilliant person. I've read both of his novels, but his father worked for the CIA. So Trump's taking on interests that are enormous, and you worry, will he survive these interests?
Will the world survive what's going on right now? I mean, you said we're a long way from World War II, Bob, but I think we're starting to get to the point where people are really seriously thinking, what's World War III going to look like? How do we stop it? We can't stop it with an old way of thinking. We have to have a new way of thinking.
I think we do too. So I think we have to accept a little bit of risk, political risk that Dave points out, from somebody who has not really been out there. But on the other hand, now that he goes out there, he's getting feedback and he'll be better. And he's going to serve 4 years. So it'd be great that he has a lot of experience to deal with these complex and difficult problems.
God willing, he'll serve 4 years. I know most of my journalist friends are thinking, how can we impeach him? Most of my journalist friends are thinking that way. This is the Rhett Palmer Show. He'll be back next time. We enjoyed having you listen to us. Thank you very much.
And is Jim Baker available?
Claire.
That was a good
Great
ending.
show, guys.
Yeah, that was a good ending.
One of the
to the show.
worst things that you can say or situations is
Bob, would you
people
take your
treading water
You
in the
gotta clean this
swamp
up.
easily say, we never did
I was
it
running
that
to
way
the bathroom.
before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Just take your stuff.
it's just hard to break out of
Is that
that.
okay?
And we're all in the
Yeah.
swamp. You're in the swamp,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because
Hit
we're
all
just
your
creatures
spots.
of our habit and we're trying to look out of the swamp.
I'm getting back. I don't know
Yeah,
what.
by the time you get this down, it'll be time for
It's a
Rhett to leave
heck
on
of a risk.
vacation.
Well,
You know.
It was an interesting
Okay, no problem.
round here. I don't know how many people out there are going to be moved and shaken by it, but hopefully we got a few.
I owe you lunch.